OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
7:30 on this Monday morning. You're very welcome along to OTB AM. Eoin and Nathan with you right the way through until 10 o'clock this morning. And it is another big Mount Rushmore Monday morning for you. We've got Kilkenny up to go through what is potentially going to be 4 hurlers this morning. Most importantly, though, Tommy Walsh is back on OTB AM this morning, looking ahead to that. We're continuing our Premier League previews as well. 2 days now until the season resumes, and there's plenty to get stuck into in the back pages as well, with the FAI and IRA, a few financial situations in particular dominating the back pages. Nathan Murphy, a very good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Very well. So what you're going to do right now is take us to an alternate universe, a universe where the summer is heating up nicely and it's about to reach its apex today.
Well, if the world hadn't turned forever back in March and we hadn't been stopped still by a global pandemic on, we'd be waking up this morning, we'd be thinking about the day ahead. A sunny, beautiful day, a nice stroll to the Aviva Stadium, maybe stop off in the Bath pub for a couple of pints, maybe get ourselves a couple of nice corporate tickets for Ireland against Poland at Euro 2020. This should have been the opening weekend of Euro 2020. Should be talking about England-Croatia today. Repeat of the World Cup semi-final and building up. How are we going to deal with Lewandowski? How the hell are we going to deal with Lewandowski? Can Shane Duffy handle him? Who's going to play, Coleman or Doherty? Mick McCarthy, he's not playing Matt Doherty after the season he's just had. Who's led Wolves to a Champions League place? These are the conversations we could have been having.
Tomorrow's conversation then would have been, where is Mick McCarthy Park going to be placed? What road in Dublin is going to be named after Mick McCarthy? Or when is Mick McCarthy's statue going to be erected? This is the big heartbreaking thing about this alternate universe that exists, Nathan, is that we look across at all the greatness that Mick McCarthy was going to achieve over these next few weeks, and we just think to ourselves, well, that's never going to happen for him at this point.
No. I'm taking a big leap there as well, that we would have actually qualified for
massively.
Euro 2020. Otherwise, we're sitting here today going, God, I can't believe I spent 125 quid on a ticket for Slovakia against Poland that nobody seems to want to buy. Maybe that was more the alternative reality that we might well have been talking about today.
We might have got some good content out of the fact that there was a good influx of people from Slovakia and Poland in Temple Bar, for example, throughout the afternoon. Or what?
You would have been down there doing a video on.
Like, you're talking about your alternate universe. I'm looking wistfully down at the boarded up windows of Temple Bar this morning and thinking to myself, God, what could have been? What a great afternoon I could have had for myself.
Those €7 pints.
Those €7 pints.
What joy you could have had. Yeah, it's a little bit depressing to think about, but we'll have it next year with a little bit of luck, and we'll have Stephen Kenny there, so we'll have this beautiful style of football that is going to blow the polls apart. So, and we have sport back. We have our new reality.
We certainly do have our new reality. This is the thing. All good things come to those who wait, and that's certainly going to be the case for Irish football fans. Malachy Clerkin of the Irish Times was saying yesterday that today would have been Tip versus Cork, Clare versus Waterford, the Connacht football final, and the first weekend of the Euros. On the upside, I spent the morning weeding. That would have been quite the unbelievable weekend. What would you have done? a Connacht football final or the first weekend of the Euros, Nathan?
But this is always the tough life that us sports reporters lead, where you find yourself in the Hyde Park on what would have been maybe a wet, thundery Sunday afternoon, while there's a brilliant match taking place between England and Croatia, and you're going, can I record it? Can I avoid the score till I get home? How does this all work? But we wouldn't have complained. Listen, if Mayo were back winning Connacht titles, steamrolling straight through to the Super 8s, all would have been good in the world.
Well, yeah, of course, the news over the weekend is that Mayo are going to get their hands on the All-Ireland, probably after a replay on Stephen's Day, which would obviously be quite... That is the real universe again. Just to bring things back to reality again, that is the thing that is going to happen this year. And as you say, sport has been happening. There has been golf over the course of the weekend. We're going to wait to get your Rory McIlroy take. We're going to leave that till around 8 o'clock this morning, Nathan. Before that, let's get into the Sunday paper review. Cliona Foley and Hector joined Joe this weekend, and there was only one place to start.
OK, Cliona, let's start with the story which has dominated over the last few days. It's on the front pages, it's on the back pages. Daniel Kinahan was name-checked 3 times by Tyson Fury when he announced effectively the biggest fight of the 21st century, maybe the biggest fight in British boxing history. The extent to which Daniel Kinahan has risen to the upper echelons of fight-making in the sport has become very clear over the last month or so. There's been what feels like a very concerted PR campaign on various fronts, kicking off with the likes of Bob Arum and Sandra Vaughan speaking on YouTube and doing various interviews. We've had the documentary on YouTube about what happened at the Regency. We've had various people in the boxing world coming out and extolling the virtues of Daniel Kinahan. There are numerous places we could start. I've the Business Post in front of me. We might jump in there. This is across all the papers. Page 9 of the Business Post, for instance, has two pieces. Neil Richmond, who is Fine Gael TD for Dublin Rathdown, has written a piece. He had a statement during the week. And we have Des Gibson, who was the editor of The Star, talking to Barry White. So to give people a flavour of what Neil Richmond is saying, he outlines his objections to Kinahan and says, that is why I and a number of other TDs like Alan Kelly of Labour, Jim McCallan of Fianna Fáil made the decision to speak out last week. He says, last Thursday, I wrote to my colleague Simon Coveney, Taoiseach, Minister for Foreign Affairs, asking that his department make a direct appeal to the authorities in Dubai to hold Kinahan to account. He goes on to say, in Westminster, Stephen Farry, the Alliance Party's MP for Northampton, he has tabled a question to the relevant minister and put down a motion calling for a debate on the issue in the British House of Commons. He says, I've spent the last few days speaking with foreign news outlets that I have previously been in contact with over Brexit to make sure the truth is known. In addition, I've written to both Sky Sports and BT Sports asking them to make sure to inform themselves. And he finishes off by saying, boxing's reputation has suffered immensely on this island and further afield in recent years and is now suffering internationally to a huge extent. Only those overseeing the sport can correct it. They know what needs to be done. And Neil Richmond says, Daniel Kinahan can have no part whatsoever up front or in secret in managing boxing events. If he does, the sport which has given this nation so much joy will have been left down for the count. So that's Neil Richmond. And Des Gibson of The Star, alongside that piece, has written to the Society of Editors in Britain to directly inform them about Daniel Kinahan. And The Star are not going to cover this fight. That came out during the week, Lena.
Yeah, and people may not be aware of that. And I think it was a really interesting thing for them to do because The Star is a very prominent cover of boxing and also sponsors amateur boxing in this country. So it has skin in this game. It knows the game, and it is, for them to come out and say, we are not covering these fights and this is the reason why, is very interesting. And obviously, like a lot of papers in this country, they have political journalists who have crime journalists who have covered a lot of inner city crime and drug cartels in this country, so they feel particularly strong, and I think that's important. I mean, everybody kind of, I think, probably knows this story quite well now. There are a couple of pieces in the paper today that discuss it, and really it's a question, I suppose, about somebody who is, the question is about Daniel Kinahan's legitimacy as a businessman, I suppose, really, given the allegations that surround him, which come from the Irish police and other security forces around the world. So it is really good that it's been raised. One of the things I think people may not be aware of is that some sports journalists have been covering this element of boxing for a while, some haven't, and I've seen a lot of criticism online from people saying, oh, why haven't boxing writers written more about this? First of all, MTK, the company he used to own, banned journalists in the South from talking to any of their boxers because this issue has been raised for quite a while. And also, I think, people should also understand that if you're a beat writer, in other words, if you're somebody who covers a sport, all constantly, all the time, you very often have editors on your back just looking for live stuff all the time. And you don't have time, first of all, to go into the details and background stuff. And it's difficult for you. I noticed Gavin Casey of the 42 this week saying that his house, who's a guy who covers a lot of boxing, saying that his house had been targeted 5 times, and responding to people saying, why haven't you written more about this recently?
Yeah, I should jump in at that point and say, really, we don't know the nature of those incidents. We don't know who's behind them, and so
no, we don't.
That is speculation on our part. We can't link them directly to this story.
It's unusual for a sports journalist to have somebody knocking in their windows. I'm not saying who did it, who's responsible, but that is unusual. And that reflects, I think, something that has it's really interesting. I think sport is just a complex, multi-layered thing, right? And it involves so much, and lots of paper coverage today is about this. It's really interesting that without live sport, we're actually, and because of world events and local events, we are talking about stuff that is the multi-layered stuff that's underneath sport that we don't often talk about for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
But sport involves, the ethics of big business, political regimes, sometimes possibly criminal elements. Even, I'm a big fan of the Olympics, and yet we know there has been, multiple corruption in the Olympics over the years that they've had to address. So, sport is multi-layered, and I think that has been so underlined, I think, this week, particularly with this story.
I suppose, this has been forced to the forefront of everybody's minds, really. I mentioned Bob Arum and Sandra Vaughan and the Regency documentary over the last month, but Tyson Fury midweek, just made a point so clearly of name-checking Daniel Kinahan up front and at the outset. Hector, to put a few other points to people and to you then, where this story is at now is I think everybody in Ireland is acutely aware of this story. It's almost at a political level, as Neil Richmond said there, and then even from a broadcaster point of view, to reach out beyond these shores. So Patrick O'Connell here has a piece in the Sunday World on page 4. Gardaí issued security advice to Sky Ireland over a threat against the station's staff linked to Daniel Kinahan's involvement with the fights broadcast by the station. You might remember there was graffiti outside Sky offices some time ago. Also, writes Patrick O'Connell, there have been details of the guidance from Gardaí revealed today. Sources separately said that the big UK broadcasters are now considered unlikely, and I'm surprised to see this. The big broadcasters in the UK considered unlikely to broadcast the €200 million rated fight, Fury versus Joshua, while Kinahan's name is attached to it. Last night, BT Sport was coming under increased pressure not to show Tyson Fury's upcoming second rematch with Deontay Wilder. And there are sources quoted in Patrick O'Connell's piece. The media attention in Ireland and the calls from the Irish Taoiseach for a boycott has really spooked broadcasters in the UK, a source told the Sunday World. Regardless of whatever money is on the table, no reputable company will allow itself to be seen in business with an organised crime group. And then page 6 of the Sunday World, Nicola Tallant, a crime journalist of the year who's been across the story for a very, very long time now and done brilliant pieces, makes the point that Kinahan has taken the greatest gamble of his life and the next few months could make or break him, as in stepping forward like this is the point she's making. And suddenly the likes of the Taoiseach, of Alan Kelly, of Neil Richmond all coming forward. The highest office in the land effectively is now on top of this story. And that's where we are, and it seems like there's an effort to almost alert broadcasters in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, wasn't it really to see Tyson Fury coming out like he did? It was almost as if he got a text on WhatsApp from a mate. Just don't forget to say something or mention me on the text. Or it was a very, very strange tweet.
Very pointed.
Very pointed. It's as if it's a mate going, it's as if you get a text going, don't forget to get milk. We've no milk. Don't forget, we've no milk. And it was. It's just where we are at the moment with money, as Cliona said, and the sport and across all sports. But whether you're in the York Hall or the Guildhall or any of those boxing, the boxing fraternity has always had a varied and colourful background, and this is just the next chapter in where it is at the moment. Let's look back to last year in Saudi Arabia. Like, what in the name of God was that all about? That heavyweight bout in Saudi Arabia. Don't tell me it wasn't all about money either. So boxing's at a strange place at the moment, because I think Fury's a great boxer. There's no disputing that, and it's an exciting division. But at the moment, it's clouded by and shrouded by a lot of other stuff. So it's a unique moment for heavyweight boxing, and where we are now with promoters.
Yeah,
and I also think, Joe, obviously, one of the sad facts of all of this is the fact that we've never seen Katie Taylor, arguably our greatest boxer, box in Ireland professionally, and the fact, the links that have been made, whether correct or not, to the whole Regency feud and all the rest, they're the things. Mark Gallagher does a good piece in the Mail on Sunday today. These explain some of the reasons why we'll probably never see Katie Taylor fight in Ireland, because of security worries over a major fight being staged in the inner city.
Yeah. There's one other piece just to mention. Mark Gallagher's piece, really good in the Mail, and David Walsh writes in the Sunday Times, and, you know, clearly he starts off by saying, thank you, Tyson Fury, we're in your debt, almost making the point that Tyson Fury has brought all this to the fore now. But he looks towards Anthony Joshua, David Walsh, towards the end of his piece. He said, I had hoped for better from Joshua, who claims to stand for more than just making money. At a Black Lives Matter protest last weekend, he said, I'm going to be real with you and about gang culture. You have to realise it's done. Gang life is finished. I'm not promoting any gangster business. And Walsh asks, how does that sit with the current controversy? And we haven't heard from Anthony Joshua, so that's very much in the ether as well.
And Joshua was represented by Frank Warren, obviously, on the other side, and, you know, but would, again, has skin in this game somehow, right? And the really interesting thing is that I didn't know that he had spoken about gang violence, but, like, it's such a relevant topic for young people, particularly young people in inner city London, where, you know, gang violence and knife violence amongst young kids has been so detrimental. And I read an article a few years ago about a crowd called the Harris Federation. They run school. They're involved with schools and academies in London trying to fight gang culture. And in fact, one of their schools was where Stormzy went to school, and it was a fascinating read. And just the effect of gang culture on young lives and young black lives, especially in London, is shocking. So it is interesting, but it underlines the contradictions really about sport. You know, sport nowadays is big business. And big business is largely, not always, but largely about money, not necessarily about ethics.
Well, we're about to see where it all goes, because this thing blew up, like I said, a month ago, and there was much talk in the media, and then it went away, and then Tyson Fury had his video this week, and suddenly we have the political class involved, and that is the difference now with a month ago. We have the Taoiseach in the House of Parliament expressing his unease with the whole thing, and suggesting a boycott of the fight might not be an unreasonable stance. And we have also the Taoiseach now, it seems, contacting the UAE and making Irish lack of comfort with this whole situation very clear. And that's where we are. And Joshua, her, and everybody concerned with this fight. We heard Bob Arum was on the station this week. He still has no qualms with Kinahan's involvement whatsoever, has said he's found him to be thoroughly decent, admirable, his word is his bond, all these kind of things from Bob Arum. So the bottom line tends to rule in sport, and we'll have to see where this goes now with political involvement. It's all over the papers today, and generally people, and, you know, very similar points being made across the board on Daniel Kinahan and his involvement in this fight.
I think the questions about the television coverage are the more interesting ones, because remember, like a lot of professional sport in America, professional boxing is a private company. It isn't influenced by anything. No governments will ever influence it. It doesn't have to follow any laws or suggestions from politicians. But what is one of its paymasters, its biggest paymaster, is television. That's the interesting question.
Yeah, well, some early reports there that there is unease now in Sky and BT over this fight, and that's the first I've seen of that. So we'll watch it play out over the coming days. Sorry, Hector, last point then on this,
Just finally on that. Back in the day, you had two promoters going head to head with their different stables, two promoters. Now it seems to be multi-layered. There's so many layers now and so many people in the ring involved. It's just not the one promoter on one side and one promoter on the other. It seems it's completely different than the way it used to be.
Page 4 of the Sunday Independent, and this is the absolute other end of the spectrum. You're a GAA coach, Hector, I know. Colm O'Rourke is writing about the new protocols for underage players if they want to get back involved. What exactly are they? I'm sure there's lots of parents listening who'll be very interested in all this. What is the plan when we get back underway?
The plan for the end of June for any underage volunteer coaches around the country is that the gates will reopen on the 28th or 29th of this month with no contact until the 20th of July or so. So you are allowed back under strict supervision. And we've had a few COVID meetings in my club in Claregalway in County Galway here this week, a couple of Zoom meetings. So it's a very difficult moment. It's a bit of a quagmire. It's a bit of there will be traffic jams, to put it mildly, when teenagers and kids have been dropped off. Whether kids should be dropped off at the moment when there's no contact It's hard to get a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old not to hop out of the car and run straight onto the pitch. But on strict supervision and under your COVID officers who have to be appointed to each team, it's very difficult. Conor O'Rourke rises on page 4. A fine mess. We'll see us having a drink and a haircut before we can play, says Colin O'Rourke. And the COVID supervisor, and this is what all clubs are talking about this week on Zoom. Juvenile clubs or their nominees have to stand at the club gate, collect questionnaires from players before they are allowed to train. And this form will have to be downloaded and filled in for every occasion on which players train or play. So this is arriving to training on a Tuesday evening or a Thursday evening all over the country. Then he goes on to talk about, imagine a big club like Kilmacud Crokes in Dublin with 183 teams going through this rigmarole, says Colin O'Rourke. If each night's training or game, the Greens get better into government any soon, they will shut down the GA altogether. 183 teams means 3,500 players, 10,000 individual pieces of paper every week. And I can relate to that. We've got 750 juvenile members in the club I'm involved in. How can you take temperature and sanitise hands, make sure they sanitise hands, and take that form from a parent in the car park? It's hard enough to get into a car park at normal rural clubs as it is. So you're going to have parking attendants and traffic lights, as well as thermometers and sanitisers. It's heaping everything onto the clubs who want to open up, who want to get kids back playing during the summer in a small window of opportunity. But O'Rourke really writes about it pretty well, and it's a nice piece on page 4 in the Enda.
Because he says the supervisor has to stand at the gate, check documents before anyone's allowed in. If somebody's not taken their temperature and filled it in on the form, will they be turned away? And he says, what about the person who doesn't have a printer? Will the COVID supervisor be issued with PPE when carrying out the role? Is another point in all this, because you're handling all these papers. It does seem a touch unwieldy, Cliona, while you want absolute safety at the same time.
Look, it's a nightmare, and this is particularly a nightmare for sports that are so volunteer-based, and the GA's greatest asset is that it's so volunteer-based and in part of all of our lives in every community in the country. But this creates even more work for volunteers now, and that's the great question. Colin O'Rourke's argument has been all the time, and he's been very strong on this, is that the GA have been overcautious, that they've been too slow. I heard Alan Milton speaking on their behalf yesterday, and he was saying, look, we feel we're only 2 weeks away from getting this right, and they've always made the argument because they're the biggest sporting organisation in the country, they wanted to make sure that all of their members were safe. Now there's an argument, Pat Spillane in the Sunday World is very strong on it today as well, and has been the same thing, saying you're being too cautious. Other people have moved it forward. Why are you not moving it forward? But I don't know that they have any other option in terms of the protocols, in terms of, the temperatures and all that. Alan Minton seemed to indicate yesterday that if you fill down this form once, then online, if you take your temperature or something, that you can let your club official know, I'm okay this week and I go in. It's not going to be a question of having to fill out forms every week. Okay. But this all remains to be seen. But it is a very, very difficult area. I think this area, and the other one that I'm surprised there isn't more about in the papers today, which is the fitting in the club season and the inter-county season, and some counties already looking as if they're constricting their club season so that they can give more time to their county managers and their county teams. That's actually the other huge debate about this, and Sean McGoldrick has a very good piece in this in the Sunday World, looking at that area. So there's two things, but as somebody who's involved in the club, Hector is ideally placed to know just how difficult this is going to be even at juvenile level.
Yeah, sure will. Last 20 seconds, Hector, and I'll get you on the far. I bet 20 seconds and I'll get you the far end of the news. So sum up your point there. Sorry to interrupt.
16-year-olds, you can. If I go onto a pitch in a couple of weeks' time, I have to stay with that 10 players for the next 4 weeks. It can be done with 16, 14s and 15-year-olds, but it cannot be done with the smaller kids. And they have to get out as well, the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10s. How in the name of God are you going to corral them into this world that we have coming up at the end of June? Yeah.
So on to John Mitchell. I would suspect this is relatively new news to a lot of people in the last while, and it's part of this conversation. It's a special report. Mark Gallagher, others have written about this in the last while. This is a 2-page spread. It's very informative. It's very good. John Mitchell, so there are 1,600 GA clubs on the island, and at least 10 of them are named in honour of John Mitchell, from Castlebar with their 31 Mayo titles to Tralee and so on. So Mitchell's GA clubs are around the country, about 10 of them. There's a subsection of this which outlines who John Mitchell was. So I might just outline that and then I'll get your thoughts on the overall piece. John Mitchell, he was born in 1815 in County Derry. He studied law at Trinity. In 1845, he got involved in the nationalist cause, and this is why he has a real affiliation with the GAA. He joined the Repeal Association. In 1848, he launched the United Irishman newspaper, and ultimately he got himself into trouble with the authorities and he had to leave the country. So he departed a nationalist hero in a sense. And at the time, 1840s and 50s, John Mitchell was a massive celebrity, a huge name in Ireland. It's in the US that the more troublesome side to his character emerges. While in the US, writes Mark Gallagher, Mitchell edited a number of newspapers, regularly championed the rights of slave owners. He talked about African Americans as innately inferior people in his justification for slavery. He added, we deny that it's a crime. He also stated it was his intention to make American people proud and fond of slavery as a national institution, and advocated its extension by reopening the trade of slavery, that is. He got involved with the Confederate cause, you won't be surprised to hear, and was seen as, even by Confederate standards, extreme in his views on this whole area. And then, in the end, he returned to Ireland in 1875. He won a seat in Parliament and died shortly thereafter at the age of 59. So that is the full picture of John Mitchell. And there's a quote here from Miles Dungan, who presents the History Show on RTE. He says, "It's the same as Oliver Cromwell. In Britain, Cromwell is seen as a democratic hero, has a statue outside Westminster, but we have a slightly different perspective of Cromwell. It's the same thing with Mitchell. In Ireland, he's remembered as someone involved with the Young Irelanders and a patriot. In the US, they might have a different view of him." So, Hector, this is one of the issues that I suspect, surprisingly to lots of people, the GAA might have to confront.
Yeah, it's very topical at the moment, and I'm just looking at the picture there. There's another statue. It seems to be all about statues and whether they should stay up and who they're dedicated to. But there's no doubt in his incredible story about John Mitchell. I never knew about that and the variety of John Mitchell clubs all over the country, but there's a bigger issue here. And he goes on and says, Michael Cusack published anti-Semitic views. Do we go back and rename the Cusack stand, take down the statue in Croke Park, rename Cusack Park in Ennis and Mullingar because of what we do? He's putting out that. And look, it's a very touchy subject at the moment. But at the back of it is a strong historical piece, and the headline, the GAA too bonded to their past. Can you shake the past? How much do you need to cherish the past going forward? I don't know. Cliona, what do you think?
It's a really interesting and difficult question, I think, and there are clearly instances where you say, yeah, definitely that should be changed, and one of them is quoted, I think, here, the Washington Redskins one, where there's been an ongoing pressure in America to change the name of that NFL team, but like Brian Hanley is another historian, and fascinating stuff in this, really. I mean, history informs us and sport should inform us as well, and this is really a brilliant piece by Mark and some great comments on it. But he's saying it actually has happened before where GAA clubs have changed their names. Brian Hanley says it's clubs named after Patrick Sarsfield or St. Patrick, but there was a time after the Boer War when a number of clubs in Ireland were named after heroes from that war. You had the likes of Tuam Krugers and hurling clubs in Tip and Galway named after General de Wet. Interestingly, all of their names have since been changed. So, as we move forward and reflect on things, I'd say there will be a debate in some of these clubs, and quite a lot of clubs, as I said, they're not John Mitchell's, but they have Mitchell's in their name, and that's where it came from.
I think it's very difficult to see how a change doesn't happen, to be honest, when you're this aware of the history now. So Brian Hanley makes the point, and I agree with this totally. It's important to point out these clubs who are named after Mitchell are not named after him because of his views on slavery and race, and that is absolutely the point, and everybody understands that. And he says there's plenty of people at these clubs who have no idea who Mitchell was, even his contribution to Irish history. But we should start that discussion now. And later on, Hanley says, this could very easily turn into a kind of culture war, and that shouldn't happen. We should have a discussion about Mitchell, what he stood for, and why people idolised him, and then we need to recognise that there may, and this is ultimately where I'd have sympathy to club members who are very attached to their club name and put huge stock in it. But when Hanley makes this point, I can't really disagree with it. He says we need to recognise there may be people playing for these clubs now who 150 years ago would have been regarded by Mitchell as innately inferior. Now, how can you turn around in a multicultural society and ask anyone to stand over that and say, well, look, that's in the past, let's leave that? What's in a name change, really?
Mark Gallagher's final line, Joe, is, and if black lives do matter in the GA, perhaps it is time to revisit the status of John Mitchell. So, you know, it's just a really interesting, the last 2 weeks have educated me so much, and this article educated me greatly because I had no idea. I saw a reference to him, Keith Duggan, and I saw Eamon Sweeney also makes a reference to it today, but I had no idea of the history, and I'm covering GA a long time.
No, I didn't either, I have to say. So
Neither did I.
So I guess, look, it's as with so many areas, it's how this is done now. It's, you know, you'd rather it's conciliatory and people sit around and talk and, you know, we talk about doing it for the right reasons and who do we want to celebrate, and all these kind of conversations could happen, as opposed to just being told, well, you know, this is being changed and you don't get a say in it. That will probably cause rancour and anger and, as Brian Hanley says, a culture war.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
Ottomani! And Liverpool lead!
The Premier League is back, and Off the Ball is the only place you can hear live commentary of Liverpool's march to the title, the battle for the Champions League places, and the fight for survival. Every big game exclusively live between now and the end of the season, starting this Wednesday from 7 p.m. with Manchester City against Arsenal. And we'll also have live score updates on the OTB Sports app. OTB Sports Radio, live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Missing this? When that didn't materialise, I think both Paulie and myself probably looked at each other and kind of thought, what next?
Then get this, the all-new OTB Sports app. Off the Ball, Ireland's premier sports channel, now has a new home, featuring the biggest names in Irish and world sports. Podcasts, interviews, news, commentary, analysis, plus almost 20 years of sporting archives. All free and ready when you are, at home or on the go. The new OTB Sports app. Download it now from the App Store and Google Play.
OTB AM.
You're welcome back. 2 minutes past 8 on this Monday morning, and it is Kilkenny Mount Rushmore Day. You can tweet us at Off the Ball or comment on the stream in the comments below if you've got any suggestions for our Mount Rushmore. Tommy Walsh will be setting the scene very shortly indeed. Nathan Murphy, though, has been watching the weekend's sport. It feels like a little bit of a while to actually, since we've been able to say that sentence, but watching Rory, watching the golf over the course of the weekend, Nathan, seemed like a sporting experience anyway from a television standpoint that was identical. Was Rory's form a little bit reminiscent of recent years as well?
Yeah, it was all a bit familiar and not a whole lot different than when golf finished up in March. So there was no supporters. It was Colonial. It was in Fort Worth in Texas, and the course was closed to spectators. And as a television viewing experience, it made absolutely no difference. None whatsoever. It didn't change the drama, didn't change the intrigue, didn't change the way it caught your attention as it went down the stretch, and it got really exciting. And it just so happened it was a brilliant tournament, both from the quality of the players who were playing. They had the top 5 in the world there, and they had a very bunched leaderboard heading into the final day with all sorts of brilliantly talented, exciting young players. And the back nine on both Saturday night and Sunday night was just mistake after mistake after mistake, which just added to it all. Ended up going to a playoff with Daniel Berger winning on the first time for the PGA Tour after Colin Morikawa, who's one of the best of the young kids coming out on tour, missed a really short putt. But as a viewing experience, if anything, it added to it. You miss at times in these familiar courses the sort of infrastructure and the big grandstands and that, but you don't miss the baba booies and the mashed potatoes and just the random shouting. And I think of all the sports that we will watch over the coming weeks that will be least affected by the lack of spectators, golf is probably the one. And even in terms of the Ryder Cup, which I know has come in for a lot of focus as to, well, this is the one golfing event that needs spectators. Having watched that, golf and the quality of the golf, and like any sport, the narrative that takes hold over the course of a day, it can grab your attention with or without spectators. And I don't think there's any reason why a Ryder Cup would be any different. For Rory, it was the same old story. I think it's 3 of the last 4 events he's played now. His only round of the week in the 70s has been on the Sunday. and his worst round of the week has been on the Sunday. Put himself in a good position. He's brilliant 63 on Friday, and you thought, here we go again, world number one, peak of his powers. Nothing really went for him on Saturday. His approach play is just not good enough at the moment at times. People focus on his putting. Part of the problem with his putting is he just gives himself too long on the greens, that when he finds himself middle of the fairway, 125 yards from the green, he's still giving himself a 15, 20 footer. And then, despite not playing well on Saturday, but still only 3 behind going into yesterday, but hit a terrible second shot in the first hole, never recovered, 4 bogeys and a double bogey on the front 9, out in 41, and he was totally out of the tournament. So it is the first time he's been outside the top 5 in the PGA Tour since last August. So almost a year. Granted, we've had a 3-month break. So it's a remarkable level of consistency. But because it's McIlroy, we always dig deeper and we always go in harder and heavier and ask more questions as to, well, why he couldn't see it out, why he couldn't put some, when it was asked for, when he needed to put the pedal down, why it just wasn't there. And we're probably into the same old conversation again for the next few weeks. He's playing next week at Hilton Head in a course that I don't think really suits him. It's a course that suits the shorter hitters on tour. He's going to play the next 3 or 4 weeks more than likely, McIlroy. So we're going to see a lot of him. But again, there was enough there to suggest he's still right up there as the best player in the world. It's just becoming a bit too familiar seeing him fade out over the weekend.
It's hard to know where to fall down on that sometimes, isn't it? That it's very easy to say, well, you're going into the Sunday and you're watching the competition in order to see Rory McIlroy win, and ultimately he doesn't end up doing that. And then alternatively, you listen to some of the experts where it's like, to be able to do this consistently, to be in shooting distance consistently Sunday after Sunday is an achievement in itself. So it's hard to actually know what side of the fence to fall down on. Like, do you think that he is underachieving at the moment by not seeing out more of these tournaments?
I think it's probably still a little bit too early to say that. I think he's won 4 of his last 21 tournaments, which is still a strike rate that anybody would take. It's that he's in such a hot streak in terms of consistency and top 10s, top 5s, that as the best player in the world, you would expect to see him go and win more of those tournaments. And everything is obviously focused around the majors. And if he's not doing it in these regular PGA Tour events, are there going to be similar issues when we do go through that Russia Major Championships towards the end of the year? Expectations around McIlroy are different to any other player on tour, with the exception of Tiger. But even what did Brooks Koepka do this week? So McIlroy played with Brooks Koepka and John Rahm the first 2 days. Koepka, I think he may have ended up finishing on the same score as Rory, but never contended. But nobody minds because Koepka doesn't turn up in regular PGA Tour events. McIlroy does. He shows the most consistency, the most brilliant consistency. And listen, if he can go and shoot a 63 on the Friday, an effortless 63, you just watch him and think, like, nobody can get near this guy. But for whatever reason, he just doesn't seem to have, he just seems to be missing something at the moment, that when he puts himself in those positions at the weekend, he just goes and destroys the field. He just goes and takes it apart over the weekend. It just seems to stall and stutter and runs out of momentum very quickly. You know, as he said, he got stuck in a bit of a rut yesterday again. You got to kind of drag yourself out of that rut.
Yeah.
And that's just not there.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens as the next few weeks. And what is the situation with the Ryder Cup at the moment, Nathan?
They haven't made a decision yet, so it's still, as of now, due to go ahead. And from a position probably 2-3 weeks ago where it looked almost certain as though it would be postponed because so many of the players have been coming out, I think if these few weeks are successful, and the possibility they may be able to get some supporters in, because I think in 4 weeks' time in the PGA Tour, they're going to allow 8,000 a day into one of the events, that maybe they'll just fire ahead. As a TV experience, yeah, the crowd adds to it, particularly on American soil. But like, golf without supporters isn't losing very much.
For sure. Just a quick word on the Kilkenny Mount Rushmore before we tell you what's coming up this morning. Any banker for you here, Nathan? Because I think you could look at it. There's a couple of names that come immediately to my head, and looking at a few of the lists that our panel today, we've got 3 Kilkenny voices coming on throughout the show to talk about this. A few of these names are missing.
Well, I would have thought number 1 banker, Brian Cody. Won All-Irelands as a player and the greatest hurling manager of all time. And it's the easiest selection in many ways as well, because if you do start going through, say, that Kilkenny team of the last 15 years, how are you ranking them? How are you ranking Shefflin, DJ, Tommy Walsh, JJ, Jackie? Are you ranking solely on number of All-Ireland medals that they have in their back pocket, or is there as we always say when we're going through the Mount Rushmore, is there a bit of mystique? Is there something that brings them to a higher plane that gets them on that Mount Rushmore? I see Willie Mullins is on the shortlist. Is Willie Mullins not from Carlow?
That is the question, really. Willie Mullins being somebody who I would say associates with County Carlow quite a bit in his current day-to-day life, but he's from Gore's Bridge, which is County Kilkenny. It's a tricky. I never would have doubted this for a second. I would have thought forever that Willie Mullins is a Kilkenny man. You do have to just do a little bit of research to confirm this. I'm sure Tommy Walsh in a moment and McEvoy later will give us a proper reason why there is no dispute about this. It might actually be more of a question for when we get to the Carlow Mount Rushmore about whether or not they will try and claim him, considering he does a lot of his work in Carlow. Reliably informed this morning that he wouldn't have a pint in Langton's, which is a huge strike against any Kilkenny sports person, really. He would drink elsewhere in the city, perhaps.
Right.
So
I think it's going to be a fascinating Mount Rushmore, because you look at just those 4 names that are on that short list. So how do you choose between Angela Downey and Anne Downey? They both won the same amount of All-Ireland titles. Again, how do you choose between the... Are we going to end up in, like we did on Friday with Waterford, a bizarre, ridiculous situation that has caused any amount of consternation and controversy over the weekend? Could we somehow end up that the way this all falls, if you're thrown in a Willie Duggan type figure, you're thrown in Anne and Angela Downey and Willie Mullins, we have a Kilkenny Mount Rushmore without any hurlers?
Well, that is a fairly terrifying prospect. And, I like the way you kind of pointed the finger at an OTB AM that you weren't involved with last week as the one where the standards slipped on the Mount Rushmore.
Well, were you running the show or were you not?
The poll has been running for 10 minutes. You see it on screen there. Angela Downey's on 5%. Cody and Shefflin are way out in front, 45 and 39% respectively. And Willie Mullins is on 11%, which just shows the reverence with which the hurlers are held. Regardless of what Willie Mullins has done, it's hard to put him ahead of Brian Cody or Henry Shefflin. It's going to be interesting if there's going to be one player who makes it. Like, are you picking Henry Shefflin or are you picking DJ Carey or the other hurlers you've mentioned? And I can tell you this now, it is not a certainty that Brian Cody makes this Mount Rushmore, which, saying those words just seems ridiculous. I agree with you. He is a banker. Leishman has been in touch. He says Cody is so certain. He spans the last 21 years and all the All-Irelands Shefflin won and is still there. Not my favourite personality, but an amazing manager, excellent coach, and plays the game the way it should be played. Kilkenny were sliding before he came back. Cork are sliding for 15 years now. So there you go. Does
Cody have the hat on Mount Rushmore?
Yes, without question. Brian Cody without the hat is unrecognisable. Like, if we're talking about somebody who's going to be remembered, maybe Brian Cody and Brian Cody's hat each get a place on this Mount Rushmore. I don't know. Well, that's all to come very shortly. Tommy Walsh's take on who are the hurling names that will go up there will be very interesting, although I dare say he's probably going to be too modest to put himself on that list. Here's the order of how things are going to happen over the next hour and 45 minutes. Sports page is coming your way in just a moment. Tommy Walsh then at 25 past 8. He'll be taking a call to set the scene in the Mount Rushmore. We're continuing our previews of the Premier League's resumption, best case, worst case, with Nathan at 8:45. The BMW Run and Ride is something that's happening over the next few weeks. Nathan and Tommy both taking part. We're focusing on running this morning and looking at a few times and seeing how they're getting on the pavements in terms of their training. And then the Mount Rushmore, the official selection will be with Enda McEvoy and Gary Halpin this morning. Time for the sports pages.
OTB AM.
Start with otbsports.com. They are winners. Kevin Moran on the brilliance of Matt Busby, Fergie and Kevin Heffernan. That is the lead story on the homepage on on otbsports.com, I should say, at the moment. Brilliant piece, and that piece is going to be streamed live tonight on our social channels. Kevin Moran in conversation with Off the Ball. Always a very, very interesting character. Brilliant in the comparisons between Heffernan and Fergie, and as you see in the headline there, winning is the thing that binds them all. Also very interesting on the presence of Matt Busby at Manchester United during his early stages at Manchester United. You've got more racing news there from otbsports.com from Leopardstown. Former Ireland international lands managerial post in India, that's Curtis Fleming, and Liverpool legend appeals to supporters to celebrate at home. That is otbsports.com this morning.
All right, let's look at the newspapers. The back of the Irish Independent, Gareth Bale, a masked Gareth Bale on the back of the Irish Independent. A couple of interesting stories as well. Tensions rise as players set for IRFU talks over pay cuts. So this story covered in a lot of the newspapers. Tensions mounting ahead of talks between the IRFU and Rugby Players Ireland after the players' representatives hit out at reports of a proposed 20% pay cut. They issued a statement early yesterday morning saying they were very disappointed that the IRFU had jumped the gun. There were reports on Friday about this 20% pay cut, and also that off-field staff going down to a 4-day week within the IRFU. Obviously, Irish Rugby going to take a massive, massive hit with the lack of attendances at games, possibly even between now and the end of the year. It seems that Rugby Players Ireland are accepting that cuts will need to happen, but the public nature of how it was put out there seems to have really frustrated them. So that'll be worth watching over the next few days, particularly because I think Rugby Players Ireland have, in general, had a very good relationship with the IRFU in comparison to, you say, what happens in England and in France. And the other story that we'll definitely be tracking later today and over the next few days, FAI back to the drawing board after Euro clubs reject cash plans. So this story emerged on Thursday that one of the ways that they may try and get the league back up and running and find the money to get the league back up and running is asking the 4 clubs who qualified for Europe to share some of those funds with the rest of the teams, up on €160,000. But those 4 clubs had a conference call yesterday and decided that it wasn't for them. Dundalk chairman Bill Heiser wrote to officials from other league clubs saying they've been let down by the FAI over a number of issues, including the failure to set a date for the resumption of the League of Ireland, the only summer league in Europe, bar Moldova, which is yet to establish a date. They said there was no business logic to what the FAI were proposing. So another hammer blow. There's some big meetings going to take place on that today.
We'll come back to that very shortly indeed. The Irish Examiner leads with a piece with Graham Souness. He's toasting the Reds heroes who have grown into men. That is the thrust of the piece. There is some great stuff on John Giles as well, which we'll come back to in a sec. Conor Murray says, shutdown could add 2 years to my career. This is the possible benefit of what's happened over the last couple of months. People who've been on the road for quite some time have had a bit of a sabbatical and time to recharge the batteries. Jason Sherlock make anti-racism part of GEA coaching. And then the other story here on the front page of the Irish Examiner sports section is from Troy Deeney, probably one gay or bi person in every football team. He's on Louis Theroux's podcast and saying there's at least one gay or bi person in every Premier League team. That's his hunch. I think people that are gay or from that community definitely are very worried about having to shoulder the responsibility or being the first. I think once the first comes out, there will be loads. So that is Troy Deeney, and that is the Irish Examiner.
On the back of the Times, this is the Times, the English edition. Rashford, we need to help kids like me. Again, covered in a lot of the British newspapers. Marcus Rashford wrote an open letter to MPs. He's raised a huge amount of money, millions over the last couple of months, basically providing food vouchers to young children in need, and he's written a passionate letter describing his situation as a youngster growing up who needed a similar sort of help, and look how far he has come and look at all he's achieved, and trying to get MPs on board on that. So a lot of people rightly commending. And over on the right-hand side, crime boss of boxing gets stars backing. Some of boxing's biggest power brokers have offered support for a global summit for the sport in Bahrain, despite the event being organised by Daniel Kinahan. This, again, follows the Irish government writing to both Sky and to BT over the last couple of days. But there has been little or no reaction from within boxing to all of this. So it will be fascinating to watch over the coming days as to whether Sky and BT do respond to what the government have been asking of them.
The Irish Times this morning leads with an interview with Cesc Fabregas from The Guardian. Racism, homophobia, the French disconnect. Vaishali Bardaj has done a piece with him. It's time to speak up. If you have to close the stadiums and hand out bans, we should. You've got a full stadium there of 42,000 people at Eden Park for a Super Rugby game over the course of the weekend. Things very much back to normal in New Zealand. Brian O'Connor writing this morning about McIlroy versus McGinley. The days of shut up and dribble are gone, touching on Rory McIlroy and the way he's waded into a political discussion on a fairly mild level. But he says for many, McIlroy having a pop at the Chancellor in the White House underlines the player's capacity to utter a lot of good sense. And Ian O'Riordan is doing a Jason Sherlock story here. GEA must play its part in tackling racism. All-Ireland winner calls on GEA to explore new ways to make clubs more inclusive.
The back of the mirror, Oba and out. Striker hints at exit plan, telling club, I'm at a crossroads and face a very difficult decision. This Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who has just over a year left on his contract, and it seems as though, well, if he's at a crossroads, he ain't committing to Arsenal. It'd be a huge blow for Arsenal. He is their one world-class player right now, so he may well be gone over the course of the summer. Lots of football stories on the back of the mirror, including United Sancho delay. Now it's for Greal that they're going to change their attention to Jack Grealish if they can't get Jadon Sancho. And one title is never enough. I've seen this covered quite a bit over the last 24 hours. Basically, Gary Neville telling Liverpool that you're not a great team with one title. You need to go and back it up.
The Irish Daily Star this morning goes with Cop Speed. Hendo wants Liverpool at full pelt from the restart as Prem title lies in wait. Alba concern for Gunners, Rory hopes melt in Texas, and United's €84 million bid for Jack. As you've mentioned, Jack Grealish is now the top target for Manchester United in this summer's transfer window.
The Irish Daily Mail, doors reopen, boys in green see fans back for Euro Clash. A story there from John Fallon that there could be 18,000 supporters for Stephen Kenny's first home game in charge in the autumn. It says just. I think at this stage the FAI would probably take 18,000 supporters being allowed in, considering we're probably expecting behind closed doors for the remainder of the year. Again, they cover as well the row brewing over pay cuts for rugby pros, and also on the right-hand side, Eoin call to banish racism. This following on from Jason Sherlock's appearance on the Sunday game last night, where he talked about the racism that he's faced down through the years. Among his proposals, that part of coaching the coaches in the GEA is that they would be coached on how to tackle racism within their clubs.
The Irish Sun this morning, the headline is Premier League, we're cabbing a laugh. Cop could celebrate in car park. So this is going to be a makeshift building that is erected at Goodison Park to ensure that social distancing can be maintained, because Everton are going to need both dressing rooms for staff and players for them to keep their 2 metres apart. So Liverpool's final game before they confirm themselves as Premier League champions could basically be in a makeshift scenario at the back of Goodison. And Rash MP's letter, as you mentioned, Marcus Rashford has demanded British MPs stamp out the UK's shameful child poverty record in a heartbreaking letter to Westminster.
That letter is also covered on the back of The Guardian. I encourage you to hear their pleas and find your humanity. Rashford tells MPs to help vulnerable children. What does it come to that Marcus Rashford is the one who's having to tell MPs this? And also, fears grow over frenzy of online gambling when football restarts. Welfare campaigners sound alarm over deluge of TV games during lockdown.
The Daily Telegraph then leads with Marcus Rashford. His plea to MPs, stop child hunger or alienate a generation. England striker calls for a U-turn on scrapping free meals. Open letter encourages ministers to show humanity.
The Herald again covers Jason Sherlock on the Sunday game. Sherlock an anti-racism plea to GAA. They also have that picture of Marcelo taking the knee during Real Madrid's victory against Eibar yesterday. And clubs say no to FAI's plea. Blow for League of Ireland launch plan as Dundalk feel let down, is the latest on that.
The Irish News this morning leads with Jamar Hall. Cutting the league would set Armagh back. Obviously on course to get promoted, and not finishing off the National Football League would set them back in their quest to dine at the top table. And a photo there of Rory McIlroy in Fort Worth, Texas. A poor day for him yesterday.
The Racing Post listed double seals a wonder weekend for Lyons. This a big race double for trainer Ger Lyons over the weekend. And on the back of the Racing Post, Betis eyeing up a rapid response. Of course, La Liga returning over the weekend.
Let's have another look at what's on the OTB Sports app this morning. Available now on the App Store and Google Play Store, of course. This is the feed, which is your personalised homepage. It's got all the latest news, our features and much more as well. You can click on the radio tab then, and you can listen to OTB AM live every morning. And there's also the schedule for OTB Sports Radio, our 24/7 sports radio station. And you can see everything that's coming up across the week. You can go to the video section there as well to see our latest videos. And on podcasts, you will get everything from the OTB Podcast Network. Over 40 podcasts per week up there. So, Nathan, we're going to turn our attention to three stories before we get to Tommy Walsh. Just to go back to the FAI story, first of all, you've kind of summed it up pretty well there. What's your take on all of this? First off, the fact that FAI, or League of Ireland clubs, I should say, 4 of them were asked to actually stump up the cash. The array of revenue options for the FAI at this point was so limited that they essentially had to go cap in hand to a couple of the clubs last night that was unsurprisingly rejected. Like, you can't really blame the current administration for being in this position, given how poorly the League of Ireland was looked after in previous years, and this is the situation that they found themselves in, that once you turned off the tap of people coming into the stadium, the league all of a sudden looks in serious jeopardy.
Yeah, it always seemed unlikely that the 4 European clubs were going to give up that money. About a month ago, we had Vinnie Perth, the Dundalk manager, on the show, and I put this possible scenario to him almost in a joking way, and he gave a list of reasons as to why he didn't think it would be possible, including how clubs have been run over the last few years and how different clubs have different ownership structures, different clubs have different stadium structures. Some clubs have obviously community support for their stadiums, others don't, and that down through the years there hasn't really been a lot of equity in how equality and how League of Ireland clubs have been run. So to turn around now and ask the successful clubs to hand over a quantity of cash didn't seem right. There was any amount of complications then, I would imagine, as to how you would split that money between the clubs. Some clubs have furloughed players in recent months. Some have managed to keep playing all their players. So they're obviously trying to exhaust absolutely every avenue. But it again just points to, for all the various ideas that have been thrown out there by the new FAI, none of them have come up with a fail-safe proof to bring through enough money to see the league through until the end of the season. Where do they go from here? There's a lot of talk of that there is going to be some potential government funding, that some money may come now, some of it may be pushed back until later in the year, but there might be enough to get them back up and running again. If they need to find something, because if they don't find something soon, players simply are going to be unemployed. They're going to end up on the dole. There's no major rush in one sense, in that they know who the European clubs are for next season because of the way the League of Ireland season runs. And maybe in one way they can push back and go back to winter football and start a season in October, November, when crowds potentially are allowed back into the stadiums. But like the vast majority of clubs, if not all the clubs, simply can't afford to keep playing players for another 3-4 months with nothing coming in.
The FAI officials are due to meet the PFAI at 1 p.m. today ahead of a 4 o'clock meeting with club representatives, so we'll probably have more detail on this situation a little bit later on today. We just want to touch on the Irish Examiner again. Souness toast Reds heroes who have grown into men. Great piece with Larry Ryan here and Graham Souness. It's a little bit beyond Liverpool, though, that we want to touch on, Nathan. As the Thursday night host of Off the Ball, this will be of particular interest to you. I'm not sure whose idea this was. I'm sure it was your own idea to get John Giles to go through his best 11s of various different clubs and countries over the last couple of weeks.
I'd love to take credit. It was actually John's own idea.
Oh, right, okay. Well, fair play.
He'd obviously been storing this up, waiting for the right moment.
Well, it's been a raging success, and naturally, once you moved on to Scotland, Graham Souness appeared, and Larry Ryan put that to Graham Souness, the fact that he would have come up against John Giles at the start of his career. And I might actually just read out the quotes here, because they're excellent. I can remember it vividly. This is a couple of fierce battles with Giles. He was an absolute rascal. It's no longer there, but I could take you onto Ayrton Park by the corner flag. Someone's played a short corner to me, and as I've played it first time, I didn't know he was on my shoulder, and he's just gone, have some of that. His 6 studs, a real stinger. Apart from being someone who could very much look after himself, he was a top performer, a master craftsman, proper player, but a nasty little bastard. It is said with affection and a smile, of course. I say to people, there's 3 players I never laid a finger on in my career. In those days, it was part of my job, because I was big for a midfield player. One was Zico, too cute, had a radar. Another one was Alan Ball, and I've got to throw Johnny Giles into that as well. I caught Billy Bremner a few times, but could never lay a finger on Johnny, and he reminds me. An absolute rascal, Nathan.
Well, you got to think of the context as well. At this stage of his career, Giles is well into his 30s, hardened pro, and sees this young, possibly, if not teenage, very early 20s, Graham Souness, and the opportunity just presented itself. It's come up on 4 or 5 occasions over the last few months that sometimes during John's career, opportunities just presented themselves. And when an opportunity presents itself, you don't turn it down. There was many, many cases of revenge dished out when an opportunity presented itself, sometimes 7-8 years after an initial tackle had been made. Even going back to last Thursday night, we selected Everton's all-time 11, which is well worth a listen. I told a story about Sandy Brown, former Scottish defender, a right-back, who didn't make his team, but was part of a match that went down in infamy. I think it was 1963-64. Leeds against Everton. Everton were the reigning league champions, and Leeds went up there, and the first 5 minutes, by all accounts, reading about it over the weekend, was just carnage. And the story goes that John tackles Sandy Brown, goes in, an opportunity presented itself. The two players are on the ground, and as they're getting up, Sandy Brown decks him, just punches him straight in the face, and Sandy Brown is sent off. All hell breaks loose, and the referee, 5-6 minutes into the game, has to bring both sets of players off the pitch, back into the dressing room. It's like the whole thing is just boiled over to that extent. Now, I've read 3 different reports, and all of them suggest that John tackled Sandy Brown. John, recollection is different. He is fairly sure that Sandy Brown tackled him, and just could not understand as to why he had reacted in this way. And that game is the one that really started Leeds and the dirty Leeds tag, and that this was a team not to be messed with. But there's many great stories of it was a different era. Like, even think back to Keegan in the Charity Shield and that scrap. Like, imagine if that happened today. The 2 lads would be going to jail.
Yeah. They really would. It is a different time. It's been a great list, I must say, the 11s over the past few weeks with John Giles, and that piece with Graham Souness in the Irish Examiner today, worth looking at as well. We're going to come back to the papers later on, a Jack Grealish story we want to touch on with you, Nathan, but at 31 minutes past 8 on this Monday morning, delighted to say that Tommy Walsh is with us. Tommy, how are you getting on?
Good morning, Eoin. How are you doing?
Very well. It's a high pressure zone today, the Kilkenny Mount Rushmore. How difficult a task is this for the selectors later?
Yeah, it's going to be tough because I suppose it's a county dominated by the GA, dominated by hurling. Who are you going to leave out? Like, who are you going to put in? If it was just probably hurling, it'd be far easier. But like, you can't, I suppose, put them all in either. You have to think about the other sports because there's huge sporting legends from outside of the GA world as well. So I think the biggest difficulty will be, how to get the balance right.
Well, we may as well address the elephant in the room here straight away. A Cork man over your shoulder this morning.
Oh, Christie. Yeah. After everyone knows how much I would have looked up and read about this man over the year. So, yeah, he'll be there for the year himself. And do you recognise the other man with him?
I don't.
That's the great Mick Mackey from Limerick. So it was a famous photograph, one of the most iconic photographs, I suppose, ever taken in the GA. It was where Christie was going off with an injury and he was going around, say, by the back of the goal that time. And Mick Mackey, the great Limerick man, was actually an umpire. So Mick Mackey is turned around just to say something to Christie, or the other way around. But the big heading, I think, for many years is, what did Mackey say to Ring, or what did Ring say to Mackey? So it's an iconic photograph, but I found it there during the COVID-19. I said I'd stick it up.
Yeah, it's class. Christie, of course, made the Cork Mount Rushmore. There was a good bit of debate around that between himself and Jimmy Barry Murphy, for example, about who would get that slot. If you're looking at hurling from a Kilkenny perspective, is there somebody who is ahead of the pack? Is there a banker here from a hurling perspective?
I have. If there's only one position on, I have it down to 6. And this isn't trying to be, and genuinely, this isn't trying to be sit on the fence on this. I think it depends purely on the era you came up in. So I have 2 coaches. If Cody, obviously, he's won 11 All-Irelands, as a coach. He's won All-Irelands as a player, All-Stars. He's won Club All-Irelands. He's won it all, primary schools, titles in St. Patrick's de la Salle, has done it all, has gave everything to the game. So from this era, he has to be within a shout, I suppose. But if you go back then, I think Enda's on later on, you go back to the era of the 70s and that, when there was very little coaching going on. Father Tommy Marr came about. And I know for our age group, we wouldn't know much about Father Tommy, but my father and that era, they would rave about Father Tommy Marr because he was coaching players when nobody really was coaching. Now we take it as, we take it for granted, but Father Tommy Marr was, showing guys how to hit the ball diagonal. He was showing guys how to hand pass, just all the basic skills, and by all accounts broke it down into the basics and taught him that way, and then brought it into the games. So from coaches, you have 2 just absolute heroes. And I'm sure I suppose the guys that have been looking at the game for the last 15, 20 years we're going to put Cody as a shoe-in, I suppose. But if you're talking about people that grew up during the 60s and 70s, Father Tommy Marr, I'm sure, is definitely going to be a rival to Cody there. Then the players, right? So I have it down to 4. Rory Marr, he's from my own club, Tullaroan. Like, you have to be in a shout of being put on Mount Rushmore. If there's a museum built in honour of you, there's an All-Ireland trophy named after you. There's numerous sayings about Rory, like over the bar says Rory Marr, still living on maybe 80, 100 years later. The glory that was Rory's. The front of the Tullaroan 1984 centenary book, there was only one man on it, and that was Rory Marr. So, his name from that era is definitely, I think, will be on everybody's lips. Then you go on to the 70s when Father Tommy Marr and that, great Kilkenny team came along. Eddie Kerr. I was talking to my uncle there the other day, Dick, huge Eddie Kerr fan, and we were only having a discussion about it. And I think John Dial from Tipperary, 8 All-Ireland medals, corner back there on that great Tipperary team back in the 60s. I think he said Kerr was the toughest man he ever marked. So he was brilliant and tough. And that was back in an era when you had to be able to look after yourself. There was no yellow cards, there was no red cards, there was no podcasts. So, no CCC. The referee was yourself, and if you didn't look after yourself, you might as well go home. So, yeah, that was Kerr. Go on then to my era, looking at hurling on DJ. Like, DJ was just, you nearly forget how great DJ was. Like, they say that a county final back in the 90s, even now, to be roughly averaging 10,000 people would be at it. When DJ and Gorn, the Young Ireland's club, were in a county final, there was at least 15,000 people at it. They used to come down from the Glens and Antrim. They used to come from Galway, Cork, Tipperary, all over Ireland, just to see DJ. And he had that kind of, exhilarating pace. He could get a goal out of nowhere. He just didn't know what he was going to do. And then on to, I suppose, our own era, if your nickname is the King, that probably tells his own story. King Henry, we used to call him Tenry when he won his 10th All-Ireland. We got rid of Henry and started calling him Tenry. So, David Herity, in fairness to him, came up with that nickname. I thought it was brilliant, really, and simple. But so, Henry, he's won it all, both club and county. Now he's after going on and coaching in his first 2 years, 2 senior Kilkenny championships, 2 senior club All-Irelands. And, just that man was truly iconic as well. So the basis, before I let you come in there, the basis that I was kind of using was, if you think of an era, we'll say this is a sport, so we're just thinking of hurling here. If you think of an era, does a name jump up? You don't have to think about it. Does a name jump out at you? And for me, them 4 and the 2 coaches would certainly jump out.
It's an unbelievably impressive list. It's kind of deciding between them, Tommy, which is going to be such a difficult one. Like, from your vantage point, if you had to compare Henry Sheffield and DJ Carey, how would you go about doing that? And I'm not even asking who was the better player. Like, how did they differ? What was your view on that?
Yeah, well, I suppose DJ was probably the more exciting player, as in he mightn't be in the game maybe for 56. Like, he was small, but his speed and his pace were just incredible. Like, Eddie Brennan had the nickname Fast Eddie for many years. Like, DJ was even faster than Eddie Brennan. So I always thought DJ was probably the most exciting player that we've watched, because when he got the ball, he could take on 4 or 5 lads and stick the ball in the back of the net. The crowd would be on their feet. I remember in the Leinster final, Leinster could have been semi-final, let's say, around 1991. So it would be more a Leinster semi-final, I think, against Wexford. Wexford were beating us, I'd say it was by 5 points or that, and we were going out of the grounds. I got a lift. I won't tell you who I got the lift with, but we were leaving the game early, and as we were walking down by the Sunset House, say it's kind of the back of the Cusack stand, really, we heard these roars and roars and roars. But we still thought Kilkenny were bet, and next minute we're going down the road and we heard DJ was after burying the ball in the back net, a kick. I think he ran about 11 steps, but he scored. That's what DJ could do. He'd win a match out of nowhere for you. Then go on to Henry. Henry would be there for the 70 minutes. He kind of dragged the whole team with him, dragged the whole management. He dragged the whole place with him, just there dogging the game out of it, whether it was back in his own defence, hooking and blocking, roaring on the team, or scoring with his deft touches, or like Henry scored. Henry would be known as a leader, but because in his later years he became such a leader, people nearly forget how much of a genius he was with the stick. Like, I marked him in training, and whether you're in front or behind him, he'd flick the ball or he'd have it in the back of the net before he'd even know it. So the two of them are geniuses, but because of Carey's speed, he was probably the most exciting player. Towards Henry was the lad that was there for the full 70 minutes, just leading the charge.
There seems to be, Tommy, as we prepare for this, some maybe questions about whether Cody will get his place on the Mount Rushmore. And he's done it as a player. He captained Kilkenny as a player, and clearly with 11 All-Irelands as a manager in any other county, he is the first name right up there. The argument, and touching at straws here, that could be made against them is that you look at that Kilkenny side you played in, it's brimming with some of the greatest players to have ever played the game, yourself included. And that maybe because of that, I don't want to say anybody would have won those All-Irelands, but it was as much more about the players than about the manager. Do you see any way we can have a Kilkenny Mount Rushmore without Brian Cody being on it?
Yeah, I could. It depends. If there's only one position going to come up for grabs for, we'll say, a hurler, and that's including manager, hurler, well, then he's plenty of competition, absolutely. Was he brilliant? Is he brilliant? Yeah. Do I go along with the argument about the players? No. Because there's been plenty of managers that have had great players and haven't won what he has won, 11 All-Irelands, and how many has he got to? He's brought he's brought teams that didn't have the same pedigree as, the glorious team he would have had from 2000 on, and he still brought them to All-Irelands, won leagues. They've remained unbelievably competitive. So I don't think you can bring that into it. The only argument you would say is, is he better than TJ? Is he better than Henry, Kerr, Rory? There's a huge battles there for that place. If there's two places up for grabs, I would have him in it. I wouldn't have to think about it there. I'd have him in it. But if there's only one place, no, I think, let him fight it out and let the best man win,
It's Kilkenny. There has to be more than one place for a hurling man.
Yeah, well, there's only 4 spots, now, does GA, do you want me to talk about any other sport?
Go for it, Tommy.
Basically, it was me kind of, in my own head, I said, we can't be we can't think that we're the only ones here in Kilkenny. There is other sports, but I ended up then picking other GA sports. So, Angela Downey, camogie player, when I was going to school, Breda Holmes was on that fantastic Kilkenny camogie team. They won 12 senior All-Irelands. So you'd forget things. They won 12 senior All-Irelands. They won 7 in a row. Angela Downey was like DJ, gets the ball, takes on 3 or 4 players, puts the ball in the back of the net. Angela Downey, as a boy looking at hurling, she would make you want to play the game. I remember watching her playing because we had a fierce interest, because we had a local player, Breda Holmes, on that great Kilkenny team. They used to bring back the All-Irelands back to our school. She was a teacher in our school. They used to bring back the camogie trophy to our schools every year, the O'Duffy Cup, and we absolutely loved it. But Angela Downey was incredible. She won 6 or 7 club All-Irelands as well, Eoin. Again, why would I put her on it? Because she just absolutely dominated her sport as far as I could see. If you're to ask any Cork player, I think Sandy Fitzgibbon was on there recently, talking to one of the newspapers, saying how she was, the greatest player that she came across. If you're talking to any hurlers, I'd say that were looked at the game back in that era or in the current game, they would say Angela Downey sticks out a mile. So for me, I think Angela Downey definitely deserves a place. And if I was picking the team, she'd be on my team.
Who else then? I think Nathan was asking the question earlier on, between Angela Downey and Anne Downey, how do you put one on the pedestal?
Yeah, well, you see, Angela Downey would have been like DJ, as in Anne was a great player, played midfield, probably hitting most of the ball into Angela. You know, they had that understanding, they knew where each other was on the field. But Anne would, you know, you wouldn't see Anne scoring 3 or 4 goals, but she might have a load of assists. But kind of Angela was the pin-up. She was the girl probably that stood for Camogie at that time because she was so exciting. And, you know, you probably need, you know, the great players, you probably need 2 players to mark them if you really want to put them out of the game. So Angela Downey, I think, was head and shoulders above all the rest, including any of the Kilkenny or Cork players, as far as I could see. Going outside of that then on Duxie Welch, so my shoe-ins anyway, right, would be Angela, Duxie Welch. Like we used to go to do our gymming in Hotel Kilkenny on. Duxie Welch, no matter what time of the day you were there, Duxie was there. And I don't know what age he was at this stage. He was probably in his 40s at this stage. Duxie, I was looking at his stats there yesterday even, just so that I had him right for today. He's 38 All-Irelands. And that's just not willy-nilly All-Irelands. They're senior All-Ireland titles, singles and doubles. Now, I suppose I know it from the racquetball up in Muckaleder. You have the big alley and you have the small alley. In Motel, there's a 60 by 30, and Muckaleder there's the 40 by 20. A huge difference. It's like playing a hurling game, I suppose, in your back garden and then going out and playing Crow Park. Like, there's a massive difference in the 2 games. He won 16 60 by 30s, single titles. He won 10 doubles. He won 7 40 by 20, so the different court, the smaller court, and then won 5 doubles. So he's 38 senior All-Irelands, 7 handballer players of the year. So this man was just a giant, and I'm not sure, you know, outside of the handball world, what people would know about this guy, but I suppose I used to meet him in the gym, and you know, I was in a handball competition. I think it was called One Wall there. It was kind of a challenge, kind of a competition there one year, and I got to know him. I was playing a bit with him that year, and like, he was incredible. Like Duxie just wanted to win. He came from the butts here in Kilkenny. We all remember the old handball alleys. Like, he grew up in this handball alley. Like, you hear about these hurlers going up in the hurling field. Duxie grew up in the handball alleys, and there was huge handballers came out of the butts later on, but he'd be there morning till night, as the stories would go. Myself and Tommy O'Brien then was a teacher in Kilkenny CBS. I wouldn't have known Tommy through the hurling again. He was massively into the hurling, but he was this kind of coach up all along, and the 2 of them went everywhere. Like, Duxie would go to Cavan, he'd go to Wexford, he'd go to Cork just for a training session. Like, I think, you know, I wasn't a handballer myself, but I think the best way of training for handball is you play other guys, and there probably wasn't too many lads on the circuit. So he'd be off travelling the country. That was his commitment to the game. So, like, purely, absolutely, like 13 in a row, like, you know, he has to be on it as far as I could see. And you're wondering how do you put non-hurlers on a Kilkenny Mount Rushmore? Like, them 2, I know, well, Angela is a Camogie player, like, but them 2, for me, will be shoe-ins, you know.
Yeah. Right, so we've got our hurlers, we've got our Camogie players, and we've got our handball players here. Outside of that, Willie Duggan's going to be in with a shout. Willie Mullins is going to be in with a shout. How much do you associate him with the county of Kilkenny, Tommy Mullins?
Yeah, Mullins, I suppose I'm not much into the horse racing myself, Eoin. You'd be just kind of watching it from afar, really, but I think his stats, I suppose, speak for themselves. Like, when you think of horse racing, you think of Willie Mullins. When you go to Chelsea, you know, like, he's just winning everything, like, you know. So, you know, we're hugely proud of him, obviously. But I suppose hopefully there's someone on later on the show that will know more about horse racing than I would. But from a non-hurling perspective, his name stands out, absolutely.
We never asked you if you had to pick one of the backs from the great Kilkenny teams. Who would you go for? Like, are you not putting yourself on Mount Rushmore here, Tommy?
No, because listen, you don't get into that conversation because, you know, you might be coming across, you think you're modest and all this kind of a thing. But listen, I played geniuses. Like, I was a good player on a great team. You know, I was on a great team, and, you know, I know, you know, had great times, but there was geniuses. The way I always compare these guys, you have good players, you have great players, right? But then you have these geniuses. The lads I've mentioned earlier on, the genius. There's one other player, and, you know, I played with, as I said, great players, geniuses, right? So I put Jackie Tyrrell, Mick Kavanagh, Noel Hickey, all these lads, Brian Hogan. They were all great players, right? But then we played with one genius. Outside of Kilkenny, you think of a back that was a genius. I think of Brian Whelan. But the lad that stands out, I think, above them all would be JJ Delaney. I've seen this lad and up close, and when you're up close to him, you'd even see, like, you ask any of the Kilkenny players that say of our era, or if any of the guys that marked him, Big Dan, Ben O'Connor, these lads, who's the best player they ever marked, I'd say this man would be definitely top of their list, because Cody said it a couple of years ago, I think he's the greatest defender he's ever seen. He could do it both ways. Look, we were always told the best way of stopping your man from scoring, win the ball first. JJ could do that as well. We saw his hook. He could do it on the biggest stage of all. That hook he got on Seamus Callanan in the All-Ireland 2014. A dive and a little flick. It was absolutely incredible. I seen him, our neighbours over the road, to be a small little club, Johnstown. Inspirational kind of little club, really. And, you go to like, when I say you go to remember I was saying earlier on, you go to a Gorn match just to see DJ playing. Well, we used to go to Johnstown matches to see a defender playing, see JJ Delaney, catching balls like left, right and centre. And, he was just an absolute incredible man, So as a defender, he was definitely, the best, and I wouldn't even have to think about it.
What makes a hurling genius, Tommy?
Well, the old saying, the one about talent and hard work, like hard work beats talent, and if talent doesn't work, something like that. But the way I put genius is they have both. So they have the genius of the talent, which means they have all the simple skills, so of their chosen sport, and then they have the hard work to go with it. So, you talk about Henry and JJ, and DJ, these guys. So I could practice a thing 100 times and you might start getting it. Whereas these lads would probably practice it 3 or 4 times and they just have it. They're just geniuses. Like, I remember, say, Richie Power from Kilkenny. Richie Power could be injured for 6 months. Like, he'd come back in his first training session, he'd flick a ball over your head and put it in the back of the net. Whereas another lad would be stumbling and falling and he'd try to get back into it that way. But the geniuses had it, but then they worked. The Ronaldos, the Messis, they worked like savages to hone that skill. So that's why I would say. The other thing about a genius, Eoin, I would say, is they're able to do it on the biggest stage of all. Because another part of being a genius is you're able to hold your nerve. You're able to think when the time is greatest. You're as tough as, you have it all, really. And, that's why we would call it a genius.
Well,
it's an incredibly difficult selection. And it goes back to what criteria, and I'll be fascinated to hear what Enda and Gary choose as their criteria, because if we're just going through medals and you talk about Angela Downey with 12 or Cody with 11 as a manager, 3 as a player, he won a Club All-Ireland as a player as well, Henry is 10, JJ is 9. But then I'm interested when you talk about DJ, because he's the other side, and the side I like of the Mount Rushmore, which is the magical, the mythical, and you describe it there in the 90s, even for people like myself from Mayo with no great hurling knowledge. Like, DJ's name was known the country over, still is. You only have to say DJ and everybody knows who you're talking about. And does that elevate him above everybody else? That sort of magical, mythical side of him?
I wouldn't say it elevates him above. I'm sure the other players had they had the same for youngsters of their era. Like, I'd say, Nathan, if you were to talk to people in Mayo that grew up of the Eddie Carey era or the Laurie Marr era, they could possibly say the very same thing about those players. But, I'm sure that when you were growing up, DJ was the man. Like myself, even as a youngster, my cousins were somewhere related to DJ, and they came back one day and they said, listen, would you like to go to DJ's house? We went out and we poked with DJ in his house when I was about 10 or 11, and I can still remember the wall, the gable end. I still remember going to the house. So I suppose, if you have memories like that, you're obviously dealing with an absolute genius, but Carey was magical. And Carey was there when I was starting out in 2000. I played with him from 2002, we'll say, to 2005, and he was still a genius. He came back from retiring in 2002. I'm not sure what age he would have been in 2002, but he nearly turned the whole thing around. Kilkenny, they bet Wexford by a point in the Leinster final that year, or 2 points. I think it was 1917, and they were kind of stuttering along, Kilkenny, and a few of the players then got together, I think, and said, we need this man back. We need this man back if we're going to win in All-Ireland. And whether they contacted him or the management contacted him, I'm not sure. But it kind of started with that, and he came back for the All-Ireland semi-final. So imagine being out for a whole year, came back in the All-Ireland semi-final against Tipperary, and the game was in the balance. DJ got the ball around maybe 40 yards out, 45 yards out, took off on a solo run at his age now, and Tom Costello would have been chasing him, and Tom was a tough. The guys in Tipperary tell you about Tom Costello, he wouldn't, he wasn't going to solo up the field and put the ball over the bar, but you get nothing soft off Tom Costello because, he was a tough cornerback and tight, and he was fast, and he was after him, and DJ soloed anyway, and hand passed the ball over to Jimmy Coogan, who put the ball in the back of the net. He scored a point then later on, DJ. So at that age, after coming back, after being off for nearly 12 months, nearly won an All-Ireland for Kilkenny. We all remember the glorious point he got against Ollie Baker. I think we all hurt. He got one of the best points he's ever seen. He soloed, kind of gave a little shimmy to Ollie Baker. Ollie Baker slipped and fell and off. Looked simple. And you talk about what does a genius do? The biggest day of all, with a great player following you, solos the ball and off the hurl in an All-Ireland final, out underneath the Hogan stand, and glides it over the bar. It wasn't just a fluky shot. Glides and the ball just sails over the bar. So, listen, DJ was a genius.
It seems that we've whittled it down to Kerr, Maher, Cody, Shefflin, DJ and maybe JJ as well. So there's going to be plenty to sift through later on. We've got a poll up on our Twitter account at the moment about who is your banker. Brian Cody is currently leading that at the moment, with Henry Shefflin coming in second. So I dare say that we could have two positions for a male hurler anyway, at least, come our Kilkenny Mount Rushmore later on. Tommy, just before we let you go, we must just get your take on what's going on with the GAA at the moment. Are you excited to get back involved with the club? Is this a good time for the club player, or are you looking at the train of the inter-county season coming down the line and thinking to yourself that the club season around the country could be a small bit affected by this compact calendar we now have at the end of the year?
Yeah, no, listen, you have to take it for what it is. It's been what could you do? I think the GAA played a blinder in this, and we've, I think, 3 club championship games coming up, and starting around the 2nd or 3rd of August, followed by a knockout game, and then either a quarter final or a relegation. So we're guaranteed to have 5 serious matches, probably over, I don't know how many weeks, a couple of weeks. I'm not sure all the games in a row or that, but probably, I suppose, 6 or 7 weeks. So, what else could they do? I think this is brilliant because you have 2 windows. You're all together as club players in one window, and then off you go, and the county players can go off and play their county championship then in October. So I think if it works out like that, where we've the club players for the full duration of this club championship, I think it'll be wonderful. People probably look at it and say it's a short window, but if you look at the inter-county game as well, if it's knockout, which we'd expect it will be, they play one game, they could be out, So I think the club players in Kilkenny, I think we're after getting a fantastic championship, considering the year that we have.
How have the Tullaroan hurlers been keeping sharp over the last few months?
You're tipping away there with a few plans, and nothing too hectic. It's you're trying to get the balance. Like when John Horan came out in the Sunday games was the first time, it probably looked like there was all over that to be no kind of a championship this year until the social distance and measures were gone, or there was a vaccine in. So I suppose I kind of lost a bit of hope that time. And listen, and I fully understood the reasons why. So kind of laid off a little bit, just kind of tipped around, 1 or 2 runs a week maybe. But since the word came back that it's back on, we're kind of, I think the whole country, every club player's back on now. There was a lot of panicking. I was on to Marlies to make sure and get yogurts in the shop and this week and start drinking water again in bed early. So I'd say there was a lot of diet plans now looked at there once the word came out that the hurling was back on. But we were tipping away kind of more than anything.
Very good. Well, we must catch up again soon, especially once the club gets... Sorry, go on, Tommy.
And just one more. I just didn't get the chance to put him in because, again, just a short thing. Willie Duggan from the Rugby. I'd just like to make sure that he gets a mention there later on because, again, I have no real background or wouldn't know much about the rugby game. But in Kilkenny, you talk about rugby in Kilkenny, you talk about Willie Duggan. He was famous around these parts. He had many caps, I think over 40 caps for Ireland. He played on a British and Lions tour in New Zealand. Supposedly was one of the characters of the game when characters were characters. So just when the lads are chatting later on, he definitely has to be in with a shout.
Yeah, I think he's going to be on the list, actually. I think he's definitely going to be a big contender for the Kilkenny Mount Rushmore later on. Tommy Walsh, always a pleasure. Thanks a million for taking the call.
Yeah, thanks, Eoin. Thanks, Nathan. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Tommy.
Just coming up to 9 o'clock this morning, and tomorrow morning on OTB AM, I should say, we're going to be joined by Conor Harahan for a chat about the Premier League's resumption. You can get OTB AM live every single morning from 7:30, or listen back through the podcast straight after the show. The best place to get all that is the brand new OTB Sports app that is available to download right now in your App Store or on the Google Play Store. We're back in a moment looking at the best case and worst case scenarios for Southampton, Tottenham and Watford. But first, we're taking a look back at our final World Cup recap chat on Saturday's OTB. Dan McDonnell, John Duggan and Johnny Ward discussing Paul Pogba here.
Sad to reflect on maybe Pogba's Man United career afterwards, because at times in that World Cup he was absolutely sensational and he was just in a happy place. He probably just really gelled with that French team, and the pace of Mbappe. I remember one of these outside of the foot passes that Pogba made in the final for Mbappe is one of my favourite moments I've seen in a football pitch. Absolutely outrageous, and that was very, very hard for teams to deal with. They were by far the better team in the final, and they just had that X-rated quality, really.
Well, Pogba was the leader. I mean, like in the documentary that they did on France's World Cup, Lloris wasn't doing the team talks. Pogba was the guy, he was the guy they showed anyway, doing all the team talks, rallying everybody. I would doubt that he's doing that in the Manchester United dressing room. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he has that relationship with the players. But for that World Cup, he was in every way a positive force.
Yeah, I get it. And it's obviously it is a testament to the group, and there's no doubt like Pogba doesn't help himself, and he does some daft stuff, and like, but then at the same time, like, he's a product of his generation as well, and some of the criticism he gets for social media stuff. I mean, he has a team and people around him, and it's part of the image and it's part of the brand or whatever. But like, he is still obviously an exceptionally good footballer, and whatever environment that Deschamps managed to create, he obviously felt very comfortable within himself to be himself, that he was focused in the moment, and maybe the mind drifts in the course of like a long season in England, where maybe he's just scaled the highest peak now, like that World Cup is it, and maybe it's going to be hard for them to ever to fully have the desire to reach that high again. I don't know. I mean, I don't know him. I can't claim to, and I'm always conscious of.
It's a bit of a revelation, Dan.
Yeah, I did. Amazingly, I'm not mates with him. I'm not in any WhatsApp groups with him and Johnny, unlike a lot of other people. But it is one of these things where you see that behind the scenes shot that you speak about, John, and you think, God, have I got it all wrong? Maybe I shouldn't be judging it by how he's viewed, maybe through English eyes, or maybe through managers at clubs who are struggling with him and need to brief out stuff that makes them look good and him look bad. But obviously then there's evidence of things where he hasn't helped himself. But like when you think, like, for France, that was almost a journey for them, because like in 2010 they'd been incredibly bad, incredibly fractured. I mean, then they'd had a sort of a furore. Subsequent to that, there was comments by Laurent Blanc and issues again about race and the unity of the French squad and the factions, which they thought they had solved it in '98, but of course they hadn't.
Yeah, full piece available on the OTB Sports app right now. That is our World Cup recaps, and of course the Premier League is back this week. It kicks off live and off the ball as well on Wednesday night. Nathan, you're doing Manchester City against Arsenal on Wednesday night. We're going to turn back to the back pages before we get into best case, worst case at the moment, because the other story we wanted to touch on this morning was United's €84 million bid for Jack. That's how it is on the back of the Irish Daily Star, at least. Manchester United apparently going to park their interest in Jadon Sancho. They're going to wait 12 months, or at least that's what Borussia Dortmund are telling them, and instead they are going to look at Jack Grealish. How likely, in your view, Nathan, is this of happening, and how great a piece of business would this be for Manchester United?
84 million quid. I thought we were talking about a transfer market that was going to be in maybe stagnating somewhat over the course of the summer. It seems like an incredible amount of money. A different type of player to Jadon Sancho, and you can't really compare their stats because Sancho's playing at a team that are competing at the very top in Germany, whereas Grealish has obviously been involved in a relegation battle. Still has 7 goals this season, and every time you watch him, you're impressed. You're starting to look at the United team, though, and wonder where they're all going to fit in if they're keeping Pogba. So where do Jack Grealish, Paul Pogba, Bruno Fernandes fit into the same starting 11? Are you playing potentially some sort of a diamond with Pogba on the left, Fernandes through the middle, and Grealish on the right, even though he generally plays on the left. It's hard to figure out where exactly he would fit in. Jack Grealish to Manchester United, listen, if they're going around looking for good, young, talented English players, he fits that mould. But for that sort of price, it does seem a little bit excessive.
Yeah, it certainly does. Let's move
Jack
on.
Grealish, 50 million is Jack Grealish's price.
Yeah, it really is. So, well, you'd have him as a cheaper alternative. So you'd have him cheaper than Timo Werner in the current market, for example.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, fair enough, I think.
I don't think he's going to offer as much as Werner will.
So 84 million euro, that is the fee that is reported on the back of the Star anyway this morning. Best case, worst case. Nathan, we've been doing this for the last week, going 3 clubs a day. Today's clubs, we'll start with Southampton. First of all, they're in 14th position on 34 points. Bournemouth are in 18th and 27 points, so they're 7 points clear of the drop zone at the moment. The break probably came at the wrong time for Southampton. Certainly the second half of the season had gone a lot better for them. What is the best case scenario for them?
Well, you say that. They'd actually gone through a pretty horrible spell just before the break. They'd lost 5 of their last 6, so whereas you would have thought they were safe on 34 points, they need probably, 1 win and 1 draw, so it's hard to see them dragged fully into that. They've sort of had a season of thirds where the 9-0 defeat against Leicester is the standout, but they bounced back brilliantly, were cracking form around Christmas, got enough points, got enough victories there to show us more about them. They just seem very inconsistent. They're very open defensively. You wouldn't trust them. From best case scenario, from an Irish point of view, is we see a lot more of the 3 Irish players. Shane Long obviously signed his new contract. Will Smallbone signed his new contract. And Michael Obafemi is there as well. It'd be brilliant to see all 3 of them, particularly Obafemi, come in and get a lot of game time between now and the end of the season. I can't see them being dragged into any sort of a relegation fight. They've decent fixtures. They've got Norwich and Watford. They're going to pick up enough points.
So the worst case is sounding unlikely. How likely then is a Shane Long goal glut, a Shane Long resurgence? Like, if you're talking about a patchy season, at least we have seen good patches from Shane Long.
Yeah, we have. And listen, he's just signed a new contract. So clearly Hasenhüttl likes what he sees, and he provides a different type of outlet. He still should have more goals than he has this season. You watch them in games, and at times he's unfortunate. At times, he hits the post and Danny Ings puts in the rebound, and you contrast the amount of chances the two of them had, and things just seem to fall in Danny Ings' favour this season, which is probably why Southampton have managed to escape the relegation zone. I don't think you could sit here and confidently say that there's going to be a glut of goals from Shane Long, but I think you can confidently say he's going to keep his place in the team and will contribute. They're not putting him in there for no reason. Obviously, he does the job that the manager wants. I'm sure Shane Long, more than anybody, would prefer to be scoring a few more goals.
Tottenham are in 8th place on 41 points. What is the best case scenario here, and how likely is it to happen, Nathan?
Well, best case scenario is they end up finishing in the Champions League places. They're 8th, 4 points off Manchester United at the moment, and find a bit of consistency under Mourinho and find a bit of fight under Mourinho. I covered a couple of their games before football stopped. Was that the victory against Manchester City where they won 2-0? But City battered them for an hour in that game before the sending off. And then I covered the game against Aston Villa where, again, Villa sort of roughed them up for the first half of that game. Spurs won, scored a 94th minute winner, terrible mistake by Villa, but Villa got at them and bullied them for the first 45 minutes, which is not what you would ever expect from a Mourinho team. But maybe we just need to reset what we think about a Mourinho team. You still sort of think of Mourinho at Chelsea. There's no clear plan of action. There's no great sign of fight. They just seem a bit soft, this Tottenham team. Now, they've obviously had a lot of training sessions over the break, far more than any other team, it seems. So maybe that'll give them a unity. They spent a lot of time together. That'll give them something. And again, they're one of the beneficiaries of this, in that whereas Harry Kane and Heung-min Son, their 2 most talented players, we're going to miss the rest of the season. Both of them are back. Stephen Bergwijn had an injury as well. He's now back fit. Moussa Sissoko obviously offers that maybe a bit of power and steel that they've been missing. So it could be a slightly different looking Tottenham team. But Harry Kane is having in front of goal his worst season since he really broke into the team. They're not creating as many chances from, anywhere near as many chances from, and they need him to hit the ground running. They've got a tough run of games. They start with Manchester United on Friday night. They've got West Ham, which is a big rivalry for them as well. They've Sheffield United, Arsenal, Leicester all to come between now and the end of the season. From what we've seen so far of this Tottenham under Mourinho, it's hard to see them putting together a run of results that will get them into the Champions League places.
If you had to give Jose Mourinho a success rating out of 10 so far as Tottenham boss, what would it be?
5. We're talking about a team that got to a Champions League final last year. I know the decline had already set in at that stage in the second half of the season under Pochettino, but there's been no improvement. There's been no improvement whatsoever under Mourinho. If anything, it's gone even further backwards, and there've been few signs that it's going to get any better. As I say, I just think watching them, there was a real steeliness to Tottenham at their best under Pochettino. They had arguably the best defence in the Premier League for a couple of seasons. Now you've no idea what back four is going to line out, it seems, in any game, and in midfield they're just weak. So unless he can have somehow fixed that over the break, I just can't see Tottenham improving that quickly.
Finally then, Watford, 27 points in 17th, level on points with Bournemouth, are better off by 1 goal on goal difference at the moment, so in a very precarious position here. Obviously Pearson has come in and things took a good bit of an upturn. Best case, worst case here is fairly obvious. Just outline how likely the best and worst case scenarios are to happen.
Well, I'm wary of saying that every team they're too good to go down, and actually I'll have only Norwich going down, and everyone else I'll have said are going to stay up. They definitely do have the quality. Obviously Troy Deeney is back and is probably the main character in that squad, but they have the likes of Capoue, Sarr, Gray, Femina at the back, who are all of the quality of player that should be able to play and stay in the Premier League. And they have a manager who has been there and done that in Nigel Pearson. They're, like a lot of teams in that area, like frustratingly inconsistent. Some brilliant performances. You watch them some days and think like they should be where they were last season, pushing for a European place. Like the performance against Liverpool is obviously the standout result of the season from any club, beating them 3-0. But then they followed that up by losing 1-0 at Crystal Palace. I think they'll get enough victories between now and the end of the season to be okay, and they've got a good run of fixtures to start with. After they play Leicester, they've Burnley and Southampton, and I don't think the decline should have been as dramatic as we've seen from where they were last year. They are a mid-table team who've struggled so far, and I'd expect to be fine between now and the end of the season.
Very good. That's best case, worst case for the Premier League done for today. That's back again with our final slot tomorrow. I should tell you that OTB are partnering with BMW and Triathlon Ireland to take part in the Run and Ride for Pieta, which is a cycle and run challenge that is supporting Pieta House and is proudly supported by BMW Ireland. Both our fit and slightly unfit team of OTB presenters will be taking on the challenge over 6 weeks with regular updates throughout, culminating in a live broadcasting of the duathlon on our sports breakfast show, OTB AM. We'll be getting nutrition, running and cycling experts on the show over the next couple of weeks and in a couple of moments here to give us some well-needed tips, and we'll have weekly prizes to give away courtesy of both BMW and Triathlon Ireland. We're back talking about the BMW Run and Ride with running coach Emmett Dunleavy next.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Off the ball. Oh, wow. This is aggressive. I've watched off the ball. I'm Scottish. I've seen on YouTube.
I met a South African last night and he was there. He knew that Dublin won 5 in a row because he watched us off the ball. He really, and he lives in Thailand.
I've watched off the ball on YouTube. They're good boys. We love you, we love you, we love you, and everywhere we follow, we follow, we follow. We absolutely love it.
Off the ball. This is OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station. OTB AM.
All right, running coach Emmett Dunleavy is with us now to chat about the BMW Run and Ride. Emmett, how are you getting on?
Good morning, lads. Very good.
Good stuff. So talk to us about how Team OTB have been getting on so far in the quest to run and ride well. What has been the biggest challenge from your perspective?
Well, looking at the training from week 1, it looks pretty intense for a start, I'd say. Right. You started off with plenty of enthusiasm and gusto. I suppose my advice for you guys and for most people who are undertaking this, particularly if you're starting from a non-endurance background, is probably to treat this as 5 weeks of training and 1 week of a hard effort at the end, so that you've got effectively that final week is your race, and that the first 5 weeks are training as opposed to trying to prove your fitness every single week. The key takeaway, I think, from looking at your training last week is probably that most of you need to slow down, which is slightly counterintuitive for people who are not involved in endurance sports before. But by slowing down that little bit more, you make the training a bit more sustainable. There's less of an injury risk, and ultimately what you're looking for in these situations is that you provide a small training stimulus, but that it's manageable and that you can build on that over the medium to long term. So it might be something that you'd like to hear, but I think for most of you, it's a case of slowing down a little bit over the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Does that tally with your thinking, Nathan?
Well, absolutely, because I made a very silly mistake last Wednesday. So I've been, for the last couple of months, like a lot of people, going out doing a couple of 5Ks a week, and I'm like, I'm not fast. I'm like 26, 27 minutes. But because last week the training was 3K, I thought, you know what, I'll tear into this for the 3K and see, can I finally get under 5 minutes per kilometre? And I'm coming around the last bend, nearly home, and I feel the real tightening of my calf that, where are we now, 5 days on? It's still feeling a little bit tight. So, yeah, and I was like 2 seconds outside my my time that I wanted to get either way. So, yeah, I learned a lesson that maybe I shouldn't go that fast. You know, slow is the way forward for me. Get it done.
It's a pretty heartbreaking story.
It's very much a case of slow and steady. So what we'd like is, I guess, for you guys is to bottle that enthusiasm and keep that, that intent of trying to run your fastest time, but keep it for the final week of the program. And that over these next couple of weeks that you need to keep the intensity low. And probably the best gauge of intensity, without getting too much into the science in terms of heart rates and thresholds and stuff like that, which you'll probably learn beyond these 6 weeks, is the best gauge of intensity at this stage is basically how you're feeling. And in terms of your running effort, it should be a case of running at conversational pace. That if you're not able to have a chat when you're doing your run, that you're more than likely going a little bit too quick. And even though that's counterintuitive, that you will improve off that type of intensity, that's ultimately what works best for endurance sports. So for next week, don't worry too much about what's on the watch. Go by how you're feeling and try and keep the intensity a little bit lower, maybe like 4, 5, 6 out of 10. If it feels any more intense than that, then you're probably going too quick.
Yeah, you're dead right, Emma, because nobody likes to show off. So Sheahan, dear God, trying to humiliate all of us. Trying to humiliate all of us. What was it? 18 minutes, 30 seconds for a 5K.
Yeah.
He
didn't seem overly happy with that either, Emmett. Are you looking at that time when Sheahan comes up on your app and saying to yourself, God, we've got a very impressive runner here in the OTB ranks?
We might just siphon him off into triathlon or athletic once this 6-week program is over, and he might go full-time professional in the world of endurance sports as opposed to off the ball.
How big is the disparity? You're not going to name names here, but how big has the disparity been between the top and the lower echelons of our star athletes?
It's only week 1. Let's not go naming names just yet. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So,
not literally though. You'll be happy to know, Nathan.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Eoin, I won't be doing, because we're generally, I think all of us are using Strava to sort of track our runs, and I'm now tracking Emmett, and I saw he went for a run recently where I sometimes go for a cycle up the Dublin Mountains, and I'm not lying, he can run up the Dublin Mountains quicker than I can cycle up the Dublin Mountains. I've never seen anything like it. But like
that's
20K
all going to change over the next couple of weeks.
I doubt it.
Over the next little while, Emmett, I think that's like a really good piece of advice for people to actually get into a rhythm where you're actually able to have a conversation while running. Is that something you would be advising to everybody, regardless of level, that is the way you should be training 4 or 5 weeks out from a run and ride? And then should you be getting yourself into a far more strenuous position the closer you get to the event?
Exactly. Like even for endurance, for elite athletes at the very high levels of cycling, swimming, running, triathlon, whatever it might be, the split of their weekly training is going to be 80% low intensity and 20% high intensity. And considering a lot of people who are taking on this program are probably coming from team sport backgrounds, that they haven't had team training for the last while. They might be, playing football, soccer, five-a-side, whatever it might be. They tend to have ticked the box in terms of high intensity and speed work over the course of their sport and career, and where they lack is on the endurance side. So that's what, over the next couple of weeks, that they need to work on the endurance as opposed to the speed. But like I said, even elite athletes will only touch on that faster, high intensity work, on maybe 1 or 2 occasions during the week, which might only constitute 15 to 20% of their overall weekly training.
So this is week 2 of training. It's run 3 kilometres, ride 10 kilometres, run 5 kilometres. How does that sound, Nathan?
Well, I'm going to go my own way on this week, because my calf is still a bit sore. So I'm just going to go heavy on the bike, I think, and maybe leave the running till later in the week, till I've fully recovered. I don't know, unless you feel, coach, that I should, put the bit of pressure on and just see how the calf holds up to it, going a little bit of a slower pace.
No, I like that approach. You best to give the calf a few days of a rest. Probably a good gauge of when you're ready to go back running is a simple hop test that we use with a lot of athletes. If they've got a calf strain like that, is that until you can do 4 or 5 hops pain-free on that leg, then you're probably not in a position to go back running on it. So until you can do that hop test pain-free, get yourself onto the bike. You can do all of your aerobic development, just build your fitness on the bike over the next couple of weeks. It's the great thing about triathlon is that if you're injured in one discipline, that you've got 2 other disciplines that you can rely on in order to maintain your fitness. In your case, obviously with the duathlon, you've got 2 disciplines, but the bike will certainly complement your fitness. So yeah, over the course of the next couple of days, just get yourself onto the bike and only go back running when that calf feels back close to 100%.
Basically, the translation there is that there is absolutely no escape, no excuse whatsoever to not be doing something every day. Coach Emmett Dunleavy, thanks a million.
Thanks, guys. Best of luck with the training.
Just a reminder that OTB are partnering with BMW and Triathlon Ireland to take part in the Run and Ride for Pieta, which is a cycle and run challenge that is supporting Pieta House and proudly supported by BMW Ireland. So our team of OTB presenters are going to be taking on the challenge over 6 weeks with regular updates throughout, culminating in a live broadcast of the duathlon here on OTB AM. More nutrition advice. You've had our running advice there. There's going to be cycling experts over the next few weeks to give us some well-needed tips, and we'll have weekly prizes as well to give away, courtesy of both BMW and Triathlon Ireland. Our Mount Rushmore for Kilkenny is next. First, here's the Saturday panel looking at Cork's double.
And we were absolutely cat, and we went in at half-time. Oh my God, did we get some roasting? It was.
Well, you got a shower as well. He was throwing buckets of water at people, wasn't he?
He just said, you and you out into the shower area. And out they went, and there was buckets of ice-cold water. Take off your jerseys, and about time you woke up, lads, this is Crow Park. This is not back into a hotel. You're not back in Cork. And fellas were gobsmacked, and kind of Jim Cashman took a lot of criticism for his first half because Joe Cooney, I think, had scored 1-5 or 1-6 at that stage from play. And Jim was kind of rushing around the dressing room as well, and kind of said to Con, what am I to do? And Con says, there's only one hope you have, Jim, that Joe Cooney will not keep up the pace that he was in the first half. But Jim had an unbelievable second half. Jim was absolutely brilliant. But and I'm sure, Larry, you can describe dressing rooms and stuff like that. But there was a defining moment. We're all around in a huddle. You're going back out onto the field for the second half. It's been a disaster. The cannon is there. He's down on one knee. He's a red jersey in one hand, and he's a hurley in the other hand. And he's on about do it for the parish, do it for your family and stuff like that. He said, there's only 3 of you outside in the field, he says there. Work your sort in that first half. And Kevin Hensey, this is gospel truth, put up his finger, and he says to Cannon, can you name who the other 2 Cannon are? Now, Kevin was having a stinker of a first half again, but there was a bit of a laugh and a bit of a giggle between fellas. And there was tears in the Cannon's eyes before we went out in the second half. And we could have broke the dressing room door out to get out. We didn't deliver in the first half, and we prepared very, very hard. And it didn't go well the first 10 minutes. We went actually from 5 points, we went 7 points down. I knew the game was over, time to go home. But there was a bit of a resolve. He didn't panic on the line. He kept guys there that didn't have a great first half, and suddenly we got ourselves into the game. But the Cannon was an incredible motivator, incredible man to get the best out of individuals. And that day, we'll remember it forever, people in the dressing room. That was just an incredible speech.
You need to put a health warning with it.
OTB AM's Mount Rushmore, live every weekday at 7:30 AM on OTB Sports Radio.
Time for Kilkenny. It is going to be one of the most fiercely contested debates, I dare say, in the country. The Mount Rushmore of Kilkenny, 4 sports people, and only 4 can make it. We've got Enda, McEvoy, and we've got Gary Halpin. Lads, you're very welcome. How are you getting on?
Morning. Good morning. Getting on well, thank you.
Good stuff. Enda, we may as well start with you. This is quite the pressure that's bestowed on your shoulders. I'm not sure if you heard Tommy Walsh earlier on talking about the unbelievable list of hurling candidates that are up there. But it's not just about hurling, this Mount Rushmore, is it?
No, it certainly isn't. And that's a point that probably doesn't come across often enough, because Kilkenny in recent years has become so identified with hurling, we tend to forget, or people outside tend not to realise just the breadth of sporting talent there has been down the years in the county. A few names I want to throw at you, because I think it's important that people know about them and what they've done. One very obvious one is Mick Dowling, the Irish international boxer, who became a really, really good boxing analyst on TV with RTE every Olympics. Mick Dowling, I think, won 8 national bantamweight titles in a row back in the day. Fantastic boxer from Homer. Went to 2 Olympic Games, 68, and in 1972 in Munich was 1 fight away from a medal, which would have been fantastic. Talking of Olympic medals, one guy who might be up in the Kilkenny Mount Rushmore in years to come is Arthur Lanigan O'Keefe, the modern pentathlon guy. Obviously no Olympic Games this year, but Arthur Lanigan O'Keefe from Thomastown has been to 2 Olympic Games before, and back in February in Cairo at the World Pentathlon Championship he came 3rd. So he will be a live contender when the Olympic medal contender when the Olympics do go ahead. We have Eoin Dowling. Gary might want to talk about Eoin Dowling in time. Eoin Dowling from Kilkenny City, Castlecombe Road, 2 Heineken Cups with Munster. Way back in the day, there was a lady called Maeve Kyle, a remarkable athlete that very few people in Kilkenny under a certain age have even heard of anymore. Maeve Kyle was formerly Maeve Shanky. She was from John Street in Kilkenny. Her father came to town 110 years ago actually, to build John's Bridge, the current John's Bridge in Kilkenny. C.G. Shanky ended up as a principal headmaster in Kilkenny College later on for many years. Maeve Shanky, later Maeve Kyle, was his daughter, played hockey for Ireland, then went to the Olympic Games Melbourne 1956 as Ireland's first ever female track and field athlete at an Olympics. Also went to Rome and Tokyo. A remarkable woman, and she's still alive up in Ballymena.
So
can I keep going with a couple of other names here?
We may as well get into them in just a moment, because you're setting the scene beautifully here, Enda, because what we've got is this array of unbelievable non-hurlers at the moment. And I'm not sure, Nathan, about the conversation earlier on that we had with Tommy Walsh. Did we manage to put a hurler up on the pedestal that will allow the lads to sift through? It seems to me that this is still very much all open, Nathan.
No, I think listening to Tommy, he had his shortlist, I think, initially of 6, and then added JJ Delaney into it as well, and wasn't really willing to commit to any of them. I obviously put it that I just can't see how you can have a Mount Rushmore without Cody. But then, as Tommy pointed out, well, if you start comparing one with the other, what are you trying to use to separate them? And I guess that's where it comes down to personal opinion. My feeling throughout this, since we did the Mayo one in week 1, is that the sort of mythical side of it is a big thing that maybe DJ has that elevates him right up there. But trying to pick, it's brilliant to listen to Enda talk about the non-hurling, because I think most people will go and probably tuning in are thinking, well, it's Kilkenny, it's going to be 4 hurlers. But you talk about the talent that's there. I think a couple of those most certainly deserve to push themselves into contention.
Well, Enda, we may as well let you go through the rest of the list of non-hurling contenders. Gary, we'll bring you in then to kind of give your sense of how you're selecting this, and then we may as well get into the first pick. So away you go, Enda.
All right. I started, so I'll finish, etc., etc. Richie Maloney from outside Kilkenny City, show jumper, Aga Khan Cup winner in Kilkenny, with Ireland, what am I saying? Won the Nations Cup in the RTS with Ireland a few years back. He's on the show jumping circuit in Florida. Richie Maloney doing very well out there for himself. Back in the day, really back in the day, was a Kilkenny woman from Ballyragga called Mabel Cahill, who ended up winning 5 US Open tennis titles in the 1890s. No one knows about her. I knew nothing about about him until very recently. But obviously a great story there. Long before Duxie Welsh, the previous great Irish handballer was John Joe Gilmartin from Kilkenny back in the 40s and 50s. He won 24 All-Ireland handball titles. You have Paul Hensey, greyhound trainer, two English greyhound derby winners. Back in the day, you had Paddy Dunphy from Castlecomer, won the 1962 English Greyhound Derby with a dog called the Grand Canal. At the moment, of course, you have Willie Mullins, the master of Cheltenham, absolute genius. Before him, you had his father, Paddy John Run. Do we need to say anything more than that?
Yeah.
The only horse to win the Champion Hurling and Cheltenham Gold Cup. One rugby guy, I'm sure Gary will mention him, really needs to be mentioned is Ned Byrne. Ned Byrne won an All-Ireland hurling medal with Kilkenny and then went on and won 3 Irish rugby caps in the front row. An amazing achievement. Nobody has ever won an All-Ireland medal, football or hurling, on the field of play and gone on to be capped by Ireland Rugby.
And I think we've actually got a bit of a thumbs up there from Gary on the other line. The rugby contenders, Gary, when it comes to that, I'm sure Enda's making a few strong cases here, but on rugby in particular, what piques your interest?
Yeah, the main rugby contender for me has to be Willie Duggan, because Willie was probably more than arguably the best number 8 in the world at the end of the 70s, and he was in some fantastic company there with Mervyn Davis, the Welsh number 8, and Murray Mexted. I suppose back then you didn't have a system where you had definitive decisions made about who was the bona fide best. But in '77, the New Zealand rugby writers came together to vote Duggan the player of the 77 Alliance Tour. And I suppose if you were looking for a best yardstick at the time, that for me would stand as concrete evidence that this guy was truly a world leader in his position in the game. So that's why Duggan is actually number 1 on my list. And obviously, being an ex-rugby player, you would see why I would support that.
Absolutely. Well, between Tommy earlier on, between all these different contenders here, I think we've got a decent enough picture now of who the contenders are across all variation of sports in Kilkenny. And I know that there's probably countless more people you could mention, but unfortunately, we're going to have to get straight into pick number 1 here. So how this works, if you're joining us for the first time in Mount Rushmore, is Enda McEvoy is our OTB selector. He is going to pick 4 names, and then Gary will come in and he will be able to make 1 change to your mountain. So that's how it works. So Enda, your first pick on your Kilkenny Mount Rushmore, please.
My first pick is Andrew Downey, camogie player, the greatest camogie player of all time. There isn't even an argument about that. I mean, you have Messi or Maradona, you have Sheahan or Ring. It's in camogie, which remember is a mass participation sport, and I would like to get Anne Downey in as well if I could, her sister. Also 12 All-Ireland medals, but Andrew Downey is my first pick on the Kilkenny Sporting Mount Rushmore.
Did she come into your contention, Gary, or into your consideration?
She was up there. I had considered her, but she didn't come into my 4. The people. Do you want me to go through my 4 now? Sorry.
Well, we're just going to talk about Angela Downey here, and in terms of those camogie players who you might have considered or who might have come close while we kind of get through why she's such a good candidate.
Well, as Ed is saying, she's winner of multiple All-Irelands, and she has been an outstanding athlete in camogie for Ireland over the years. And I would absolutely concur with that. In terms of camogie, for me, she is that standout sort of Maradona name in Kilkenny more than anybody else, I would say. So I would fully agree. Yeah, I would agree with that selection that Enda has made.
What type of player was she, Enda?
A forward, just a fantastic forward, goal after goal after goal, absolutely ruthless in front of goal, medal after medal after medal. Look, I don't think there's anything more to say about her than that. She was just fantastic. I have never seen anybody disagree with the contention. She was the Camogies' greatest player ever. I don't think there's any argument about that.
Who's your second pick, Enda?
My second pick, my second pick, Henry Sheahan. Again, probably no need to go into the details. Obviously, most bemedalled hurler ever, 10 All-Ireland medals, 1 million All-Stars, I think it's 11 All-Stars. Couple of interesting things about Sheahan is that he scored a goal, at least one goal, in 14 championships in a row. That's some going. And also, he played until he got injured in 2013. He played 62 successive championship matches for Kilkenny. Then he missed out on a couple in 2013. He broke the spell. It was snapped, but 62 consecutive championship appearances for a centre forward or full forward in this day and age just shows how consistently good he was. And again, you can argue, obviously, Ring or Sheahan or whatever, but no question about it. Sheahan, the supreme hurler of the modern era, one of the greatest hurlers Kilkenny has ever produced. So he has to be up there.
Is Henry Sheahan on your list, Gary?
No, Henry Sheahan wasn't on my list. And funny enough, how I came up with my list, I hummed and hawed about this. But my initial 4 people were Willie Duggan, Willie Mullins, Maeve Kylan, and Dugsy Welsh. And I used the criteria for doing that. And then I said, you just can't have a list without hurlers. I said to myself, and I didn't know, and I was hating over it for the longest of times. You'd almost need a separate competition just for Kilkenny hurlers. And one of the difficulties I have, and I've been a great fan of hurling for many years, but it's just singling one person out to give one person an award is very difficult, because even in the most recent years, going back, say, 10 years or so, you know, you've characters like DJ Carey, TJ Reid, Shefflin, Jackie Turle and Richie Hogan. Now, if I had to go for somebody, DJ Carey is the guy who I would go to, because, you know, having, as I said, watching hurling as a kid, I recognise things in DJ Carey that, you know, I saw him. This guy I've always felt could have been brilliant in a number of sports. What made him remarkably good to me was his ability to move, to take passes, and just his footwork, the way he carried himself away from defenders. He was excellent, and he was one of those, Enda called him a Maradona or a Messi character. So many times when we really needed a score, this was the guy who did it, and you could put your mortgage on the guy, and that's why I would say, if I had to pick a Kilkenny hurler, DJ Carey would be the guy who I'd put on my list, and that's not Sheahan in any way, shape, or form. Sure. And it's such a hard decision to make.
I think, Eoin, it was great to hear from Tommy Walsh yesterday or earlier today, somebody who was in the dressing room, because quite often when we start these conversations, you do have the conversation of, well, how do you separate JJ and Jackie and Tommy Welsh and Richie Power and Owen Larkin and Eddie Brady and DJ and Henry Sheahan? But much like Tyrone last week when we had a similar conversation about their great footballers, Enda McGinley was able to go, well, actually, within that dressing room, there were great players, but Brian Dooher and Peter Canavan were at a different level. And likewise, Tommy Walsh there was able to say, well, there were a lot of great players there, but JJ Delaney as a defender and Henry Sheahan were at a different level. They were at that genius level, which is probably why I think of all those players, Henry of the modern era is the one who would be most likely to feature on most people's Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and it's very, very hard to actually decipher between them. And I think if we go on to your third pick, and it's not necessarily something you've decided between, you've got Henry Sheahan and DJ Carey on your Mount Rushmore.
My third one was DJ Carey, and Gary, I think, has summed it up brilliantly there. Giving a sportsman's eye, a man from another sport, looking in to an extent from outside about what made DJ so special. As Gary said, Gary said it much better than I could. The way he carried himself, the way he would get a ball and just go with it. One thing that has always kind of interested me about DJ is this. I don't think, even above Henry, even above Tommy Walsh, I don't think any Kilkenny player has ever given more pleasure to Kilkenny fans than DJ Carey has. And I would say I don't think any hurler, certainly in the modern era, has given more pleasure to fans outside his own county as DJ Carey has, because DJ was wildly popular with people from non-hurling counties, who would just be watching on TV, just loved what DJ did. I mean, that Lake Regale programme a few years ago, I had forgotten how many brilliant goals DJ had scored. There was never, I think, most hurlers resemble kind of, I won't say most hurlers resemble one another, but you can compare most hurlers to a hurler from the past. I mean, Sheahan and Christy Ring, for instance, whereas with DJ Carey, I don't think there was any hurler like DJ in history. DJ was just sui generis. There was only one DJ Carey, and as I said, he gave so much pleasure to so many people. I could have chosen Eddie Kerr, a hero of mine, when I was younger, and Eddie Kerr would be a fantastic choice as well. But I'm with Gary on this, so DJ Carey.
You could have also picked Brian Cody, and this is going to be probably the most contentious of the decisions. Why did you leave him out?
I'll tell you why I left him out. And look, it was going to be either Henry Sheahan or Brian Cody, the most successful hurler or the most successful hurling manager. The reason I had to decide between them was they were both from the same era of Kilkenny hurling, and Kilkenny hurling did not begin in 1999. You had DJ, you had Eddie Kerr going back, you had Lowry Marr. Tommy will be happy to hear me mention another Tullaroan man, Lowry Marr, the Prince of Hurlers back in the 30s. So to get, I think, to give a broader representation. And again, if you're picking 4 hurling people or 4 hurlers from Kilkenny hurling Mount Rushmore, of course Brian Cody is there just for the purposes of this exercise. I decided I had to choose between Cody and Sheahan. And I mean, I would have been perfectly happy to have Willie Mullins in mind as well, and also to have Maeve Kyle, and also to have Doug C. Welch. But there could only be 4, which brings me on to my final choice. And Gary already mentioned him, Willie Duggan.
Well, Gary, do you want to take the baton here on Willie Duggan, because he's obviously in your Mount Rushmore as well. Can you talk to us about the greatness of Duggan?
Well, where he was, I've seen probably two or three rugby players in my entire life that who I feel they were innate rugby players. And what I mean by that is they were so in tune with the game. It was almost they took a gift from birth. And Willie Duggan is one of those. For me, Zinzan Brook is the second one. And oddly, and surprisingly maybe for some, the third was Anthony Foley, the late Anthony Foley. And Duggan just had this, he knew the game so well. And people, you know, there was a lot of anecdotal stories about him. But he was one of these guys in a rugby field, he knew the shortcuts on a rugby field more than anybody else. And, you know, he did amazing things close on the ball when he was actually carrying. But some of his defensive work was just beyond belief. The way he knew, he anticipated the game 2 or 3 moves before everybody else. And when you see guys with those type of talents, you know, they're very, very rare. But the thing about Duggan that I suppose few people might know, as a younger person, he was actually a very good athlete. Willie Duggan, in his day, high jumped over 6'2" as a schoolboy. So he was a very, very good natural athlete as well. He was, he was sizable. He had a really uncompromising aggression. So he had so many good characteristics as a player. I mean, for such a big guy, and in the modern era with training, I mean, his hand skills were fantastic for a guy in that era as well. And he was a larger than life character. He was so many great things rolled up into one sporting personality. And he was, obviously I remember him and know him very well. Knew him very well. The Lord have mercy on him. And he's just one of these characters we won't see again in rugby. And for that reason alone, he must get on it. He must make the list, definitely. I would fully agree with Enda this one.
Right. I presume everything he's saying there, you would echo that. And what pushed him ahead of everybody else for this final spot for you?
One, as I was saying, was to kind of represent a broad church, to have a Catholic with a small c choice. One thing that Gary, it's so obvious that Gary didn't mention, but younger listeners may not be aware of this. Willie Duggan won a Triple Crown with Ireland in 1982. That was Ireland's first Triple Crown in 33 years. So he was not just a great rugby player with Ireland, he was a great rugby winner with Ireland. Gary, I'd like to hear Gary's opinion on this. Actually, I'll tell my Willie Duggan story first, then I'll give Gary the hand pass. Couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, last time I met Willie Duggan, I ran into him uptown here in Kilkenny in High Street. And we were across the street from a pub called the Paulson, Benji Lawler's. It's kind of Kilkenny's de facto rugby pub. And I used to go in there a bit, and it's great pub, Benji Lawler, great rugby guy, great Kilkenny man, great sportsman. Anyway, Duggan said to me, well, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while. How are you doing? I said, grand. And he kind of pointed over to Benji's. He said, are you still going for the old drink? And I said, yeah, I am. And Duggan kind of looked at me and nodded sagely and said, well, look, as long as you're able to go for a pint every now and then, you're not doing too badly. I mean, there's a world of wisdom in that, isn't there? Anyway, my hand pass for Gary is this. Duggan, is associated with being a rugby player of his time. I'm just wondering, what does Gary think? Would Duggan have made it in the modern era? I think probably the reflex is to say that maybe he wouldn't have. But as Gary said, the guy was so fit, so athletic. And I mean, Duggan was a public, roisterer, but he was a secret trainer and a very fit guy. So, Gary, your opinion on the modern Willie Duggan?
Without a shadow of a doubt, Willie Duggan would have made it in the modern era. The two things alone. I just want to go back to, there's a very, very famous try that Ginger McLaughlin scored in Twickenham. And if you look at the run-in to play before that try scored, everybody remembers Ginger dragging the English pack over the line.
Yeah.
But Willie Duggan touched the ball 6 times in that move into the immediate run into that try. And, it was phenomenal to think he turned up in all those spaces. So he had this ability. He had fantastic hands. So he had, I suppose he had all the skill. But more importantly, in the professional era, what they have now with kids, they educate kids. So from, you got to understand from a younger age, he would have been mentored, and his career path would have been different. Mm-hmm. But in terms of pure ability, he would have been. I have no doubt in my mind he would have played. Some people would have argued to say that he might have played 6 or 7 on the side of the scrum, but to me he would have always been an 8, and most definitely he would have made it in the modern era. You cannot replicate the type of talent that he has had, and. And even looking at modern rugby players, in many respects, you could still argue he was a better player than them in relation, particularly to his hands and his ability to get passes away in tight positions. So no, I would say there's not a shadow of a doubt he would have made it today.
Yeah, the candidate is clear. Willie Duggan is on the Mount Rushmore. You both agree on him, so by the rules of the game, he is definitely up there. Just a reminder of Enda's other 3 choices: DJ Carey, Henry Shefflin and Angela Downey have got his nods, but Gary, you can only make one change, and your Mount Rushmore would have been Willie Duggan, Maeve Kyle, Willie Mullins and Duxie Walsh. So out of the 3 that aren't Willie Duggan there, who would be your strongest candidate to put up there, do you think?
Well, there's a number. I mean, we've spoken about Willie Duggan for quite a bit. I mean, you look at Willie Mullins. Incidentally, just to get back to my hurling thing, at the end of my decisions last night, I needed a hurler in there. I went 1 to 4, and I picked out 2, Willie Mullins, and if I had to, I would have replaced him with Brian Cody. That's just a sort of an also-ran comment I wanted to say. I wanted to say about Cody. Cody, when he was managing, I was involved in rugby in those early years, and as rugby guys, we were intrigued with this fella because I've never met Brian Cody. Brian Cody is one of those people who, if I had the ability to, invite 4 of the biggest sporting personalities to lunch to have a chat with them, Brian Cody would probably be first on my list, because he had this sort of, that keeping cards close to the chest, but more than anything, time and time again, I heard this: Brian Cody picks on your ability at training, how you're working in the here and now. Reputations meant nothing to him. And coming from a sport like rugby, that would have been a lament of mine years past, because reputations did count. But to see somebody who picked on pure ability at that time, I thought was commendable. But having said it, if I was to get back to the question, to look at who would I replace, who would I substitute into Enda's 4? I mean, Willie Mullins is, his success rate is just. I mean, I am not a huge horse racing fan, and like everybody else coming onto this show, I went away and I did my Wikipedia bit, But I mean, the list, for pure success, it's just, I'm blown away by it. He has 72 wins at Cheltenham. He has countless Irish wins, 10 Gold Cups, 5 punches down Gold Cups, 6 champion hurdles, countless numbers of wins in the UK as well. It's really, in my view, it would be very, very difficult to overlook Willie Mullins on any Mount Rushmore. Right. And he would be the character who I would be looking to bump onto Enda's list.
Just before we get to that, Gary, in terms of who you're going to take off, just a quick word on Maeve Kyle and why she was on your list if you were picking.
Well, Maeve Kyle would have a special, I had a previous career as a hammer thrower as well, so I am very close to the athletics would be very, very near and dear to me. But what Maeve Kyle did in that time, I think, is phenomenal. You're talking about a lady who was born in 1928, so she was in her prime in the 50s and in the 60s. She won a European indoor bronze in 1966. That's 54 years ago. And she was a late, and she ran she was at the 56 and 60 Olympics. She ran the 1 and 200 in Melbourne, and she ran the 4 and 800, getting to the semi-finals of the Olympic Games in those years. Post her retirement as a track and field athlete, she had 4 individual Masters world records. She won countless Masters championships. And to top all that, she was initiated, she got a Lifetime Services Award in 2017 from Great Britain Athletics. She has 58 hockey caps for Ireland as well. These are 58 hockey caps, and was one of the first inductees into the Hockey Hall of Fame. So her achievement is phenomenal for a lady in those years, and that's why she made my 4. The other person who I had in my 4 was Duxie Walsh, and Duxie Walsh, the handballer, and we're about the same age. We were in primary school together, and again, Duxie for me, just for sheer accomplishment. I mean, 16 All-Ireland softball titles, several doubles titles, 7 titles on the larger court. He was just an unrivaled champion in handball, and that's why Duxie would have made mine. But if I am subbing in, I'd like to sub in Willie Mullins.
Okay.
Into Enda's group.
Great. And before we take somebody off, Enda, you also have an opportunity to listen to the very valid points that Gary is making, and you can alternate your Mount Rushmore if you wish, but are you sticking with your 4?
I'm going to stick with my 4, but believe me, I have a B list, and this was my B. my B list was Brian Cody, Eddie Kerr, Willie Mullins, and Duxie Welsh. Okay,
better than your A list.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And it could as easily have been my A-list. And one thing, just to add to what Gary was saying about Willie Mullins there, as well as being the king of Cheltenham, and I mean, Willie Mullins on the Friday of Cheltenham this year saddled the first 4 winners. Very happily, I had the first 3 of them. It was a very good day, but that wasn't the first time he had done that. I think in 2017, on the Thursday of Cheltenham, he saddled 4 winners as well. I mean, that is just incredible stuff. One thing, and this has been mentioned once or twice, ever since Michael O'Leary took away his horses out of the Mullins stable, Willie has broadened his ownership. He took good care to get a lot of new owners, so he wasn't as affected as he might have been by losing the Jigginstown horses, and he's just kept churning out the winners. And also, he has had winners. Willie Mullins has had winners on the flat, Newmarket, the Cesarewitch, and Royal Ascot. A few years back, he won the big steeplechase in Japan of all places. He sent Black Star Mountain halfway around the world to win in Japan. The guy is just a genius, and as I say, he was on my B-list Mount Rushmore. So if Gary wants to sub him in, fine by me, but Gary has to say who is he talking by Mount Rushmore.
I'm sure Willie Mullins will be delighted to hear that he is on someone's B-list this morning. So Enda's final list is Angela Downey, Henry Shefflin, DJ Carey and Willie Duggan. Gary, you are switching in Willie Mullins. Who would you like to take off?
Now, you see, I think, and this is no disrespect, but you've 2 hurlers in there. So my natural reaction is going to be to take out one of the hurlers. And I would, I'm going to take out Henry Shefflin. I can't believe I'm actually saying this.
Come on.
I have to take Shefflin off the list. And, I could get lynched in Kilkenny for this, but for me, just, there is obviously just the sheer satisfaction of, DJ Carey making huge impressions on me as I was watching games at the time. That's all that would swing it for me. Interestingly, I mean, the longevity of Shetland on top of his brilliance is something that, I know we've said quite a lot about it, but that the longevity aspect wasn't really mentioned. And that in itself, I think you could say puts him apart from other people. But I have these great memories of watching DJ Carey play. So I'm going to take Henry Shefflin off the list and put in Willie Mullins. I'm sorry, Enda.
I cannot believe what I'm hearing.
On your head be it, but I have a feeling the 2 of us may be run out of town, given that we don't have Henry Shefflin or Brian Cody on our Rushmore.
Yeah, it's
this is worse than Waterford. This is the biggest controversy so far.
Yeah, well, if I had I'm not going to go through a full B list, but as I said, when I came here this morning, I had made up my mind I need a hurler on the list. And I'm being very sneaky but honest in doing that. I took my other 3 names out of a hat, and actually Willie Mullins' names came out of the hat. So if I had to nail my colours to the mast like you had to, so I had that. I had that pleasure of not having to do that. Cody would have been on my list, definitely.
Well, he would have, but unfortunately, that is a hypothetical right now, because your final mountain is Angela Downey, DJ Carey, Willie Duggan, Willie Mullins. Very quickly, Enda, where will this mountain be carved out? Where in Kilkenny will it be located?
Kilkenny isn't very mountainy, I'm afraid. So actually, maybe highlight them, maybe engrave them into the facade or the back wall of Kilkenny Castle, something like that. And actually, they would be overlooking John's Bridge, which, as I was said, was built by Maeve Kyle's father. So that would be a kind of oblique nod to Maeve Kyle. So we get her in as well.
There you go. Gary, you happy enough with that?
Yeah, I'm happy enough with that. I think that's a good choice. On the castle would be a good thing.
Very good. Well,
lit up with spots at night, of course, you know.
It was an unenviable task to try and sift Kilkenny's sporting heritage down to 4 names, but you did a good job. There is going to be controversy, I'm not going to lie, but you did a good job.
Yeah, and look, I know that collective responsibility usually applies, but in this case, it was Gary who left Henry Sheffield off, okay? And I am going to be telling everyone that.
Enda McEvoy, Gary Halpin, thanks a million for joining us. That is it for Kilkenny's Mount Rushmore.
OTB AM's Mount Rushmore.
And that is it from OTB AM this morning. Thanks a million for joining us. Coming up on OTB tonight, the news round from 7 o'clock. Beyond that, it's Monday Night Rugby at 8 o'clock and then the football show from 9 as ever. If you missed anything this morning, you can catch it back through the OTB AM podcast. Just download the OTB Sports app and subscribe to OTB AM to get it every single morning. We timestamp it for you so that you can skip through to whatever part of the show that you want. OTB AM is live weekday mornings from 7:30 and Conor Harahan will be with us tomorrow morning, and there's much more too. You can also listen to the show or watch the show live on the OTB Sports app. Chat to you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
The Premier League is back.
Oh, Mo Salah!
Every big game.